Hello, and welcome to The Fool and the Philosopher.
The Philosopher and The Fool. So you know the saying that history doesn't repeat, but it rhymes.
Yeah. Samuel Clemens, I think. Yeah.
Yes. So, in Canada, there's a lot of policies to make it a lot harder to own firearms right now.
Yeah.
And
They're getting proposed, right?
yeah, proposed. And it's meant to stop automatic assault rifle type weapons. And
bolt-action rifles. And...
well, within the profile, bolt-action rifles get added in because it's any weapon that has an ammo clip of 6 bullets or more.
So it's not a firing rate, it's a...
Yeah.
Although I guess a bolt-action can fire pretty fast.
Yeah. And a bolt-action can have more than 6 bits of ammo in it. And it's also, there's a whole bunch of specific firearms that have also been added from lists, and it's huge amount of guns.
So is like a cannon still legal?
No, certain cannons aren't actually anymore. Antique blunderbuss that people have.
But that only has one round.
Yeah, still it's under certain, like there's a bunch of profiles, but one of the main ones is a 6 ammo clip.
Yeah, there's a lot of antiques getting put in.
And it's weird twofold that this rules game put into Canada. Because Canada has had something like 6 mass shootings.
There very little gun violence.
Yeah.
There's a lot of gun deaths.
Yes.
There's something like 5,000 a year or 15,000 a year, something like that.
Yeah. There is more deaths to alcohol, though, than guns in Canada. By tenfold.
But we do have them.
Yes.
But it's not on a crazy... It's not like the Americans.
Yeah, and also, the reasons you would stop assault weapons, you'd ban them for safety, is because...
Mass shootings.
Yeah. And we just don't have those. We have a huge... And all the guns that a lot of the gun crime... Like, there's gun violence, but there's also gun crime because hunters get shot at an unfortunate rate in Canada.
There's accidents.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. One of the most common ones is a guy carrying out his kill. But most of the guns that are used by criminals are illegal. It's if a gun's registered in Canada and you have a license to have it, it's very hard to legally do violence. I know it's like illegal to do violence, but Canadian law, your gun can't even have ammo in it.
Well, I think that's in the States as well.
Might be.
Well, not when you're carrying, obviously.
Yeah.
But when it's stored, I think...
No, you're allowed to have a firearm in the States prepared to fire.
Oh, okay.
For house defense.
Yeah, here your ammo and your gun cannot be together, and I don't believe they can even be stored in the same location.
They can be stored in the same location, but not in the same safe.
Yeah,
so
that's
it has
what I
to
mean.
have separate locks.
That's what I mean.
Yeah.
It has to be stored in a different container.
Yeah. And both have to be locked. So, it's kind of also demographically with that. Canada has the second largest amounts of guns in the world.
Yeah, and we don't have problems with violence.
Yeah.
Second most per person.
Yes.
Yeah.
Second most per person. Yeah, that's
I was talking to a friend who was, I was talking to him about this gun law.
Yeah.
And he's fairly, I don't know, you could call him a very centrist sort of guy.
Yeah.
And he was saying, if this was a law getting passed in the States, I'd disagree with it, but I'd understand why they wanted to. Mm-hmm. Because they have so much gun violence, they'd just be desperate to do anything.
Yeah.
Here, we don't have gun violence, so this is purely just a power play.
There's a story I heard about Mounties, which is there's this amazing, it was either a service rifle or a service pistol that they had. And every 3 months, every single Mountie, because Mounties are sort of individually located, they'd be sent 3 boxes of ammo for their gun because they thought, they might be using them, so we'll just send them ammo. And so there's these Mounties in Canada that over the years have accumulated a ridiculous amount of ammo for this very reliable weapon. And a recall was sent out to them because they were issuing new guns, which weren't as good, that could you return your old weapons? And I think is something like 80% or more of Mounties reported that firearm is missing.
I actually saw a lot of... Laura Southern did a video on the gun thing. Yeah. And I saw a lot of people in the comments saying, shame I lost all my rifles in a boating accident.
Yeah. No, that's one of the cases with it.
It does also happen that you do lose your rifle in boating, but yeah.
Yeah.
So how does history rhyme?
Well, in the 1940s, maybe it was the 1930s actually when this happened, government took a lot of guns and put them into warehouses. So if you wanted to go hunting, You had to go to the warehouse and access your gun there. So a lot of people lost their guns by government take. That same government implemented euthanasia for people who had chronic illnesses, mental illnesses, if they were cognitively deviant.
Oh, I see where this is going. That government was Albert Einstein.
Kind of, yeah.
Yeah, it was Nazi Germany, wasn't it?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
I can see where this is going. Yeah.
And so a lot of people, this was trending on Twitter, which is they were calling the current Prime Minister of Canada, Trudeau, Moore's Law.
Moore's Law.
Not Moore's Law.
Godwin?
Yeah, Godwin's Law.
They're calling him Hitler?
Yes.
Yeah.
And a lot of people are saying he's nothing like Hitler, and he isn't anything like Hitler.
No, Hitler had a lot of good qualities. And a lot of very bad ones.
Yeah, but
I don't actually, more on that point though. I don't know if you can say he is or isn't like Hitler. Because you would have to give them the same opportunities.
Yes.
The biggest difference I could say between them is that Hitler was very anti-socialism. And I don't know if Trudeau is.
But that's why I'm saying it doesn't repeat, it rhymes.
And Hitler loved his country. And Trudeau doesn't.
Yeah. And so with the rhyming thing...
and Trudeau hated the world order. Hitler hated the world order, the Habsburgs.
Yeah.
Whereas Trudeau loves the world order, the WF.
So drawing the comparisons is, yeah, he hasn't done everything, but the comparisons can still be made to a certain point of why are you following what one of the worst governments, well, one of the most hated governments ever did.
Well, he's not following the Nazis, but...
Not following, but he's doing the same things.
Yeah, well, what he's doing is he's centralizing control, and that's what the Nazis did. It's not a matter of... Like, the Nazis increased animal rights, and you don't often see people saying, oh, this country's increasing animal rights, look at them, they're like the Nazis. And...
Well, if we start increasing our animal rights and we do a few other things, then we'll start getting really worried.
The economy improved a bunch under the Nazi regime, and you don't see people saying, oh, the economy's improving, it's like the Nazis. So what you get is... What you're saying is the Nazis used certain policies to assert control over their population. And the Canadian government is now doing the same thing. You can make comparisons to China as well, where they restricted guns, or Australia.
I feel like the gun thing in Canada is also partly opportunistic of saying, look how bad the States is with their guns. Oh, guns are so scary, so we're going to ban them in Canada. Like, I see that's part of the reason why they can even... attempt to get it by.
Well, the trucker protest, I think he's trying to capitalize on. So we just had an election, so he's not going to be out for a while. We had the trucker protests, so he can say, look how scary the alt-right is. They're going to take over the country. They're going to... The incels are going to keep doing mass shootings. Look in the States, it's happening all the time. It's going to happen here. And then he's just ready to dive in and take away those guns. Yeah, and he's clearly made many tyrannical moves.
Yeah.
Like the... Emergencies Act, the freezing of bank accounts, the calling of protesters violent and Nazis and whatnot. And he's subverting it so that...
There's even the hypocrisy of him saying the protests in China right now, like they have the right to protest and they should be protesting, and the Chinese protesters are being a lot more rowdy than the Canadians, and they're also getting treated way harsher than the Canadians for the rowdiness.
During the hearings that have come up, it sounds like the reason he might have been so harsh on the protesters was because he was told to by Biden. Which, if that's the case, I'm very disappointed, because he can't even be a tyrant. Like, it's just pathetic.
Well, but there's the other thing of Canada for a very, very long time. We are not the 51st state of America.
But apparently we are.
But there was a huge election battle over that, of us not being, and separating us out and like pulling...
Well, that's why we have the... National Broadcasting Commission, whatever it's called.
And then we're getting the thing implemented onto YouTube with that.
Yeah.
And right now, Canadians are getting bombarded by ads from YouTube saying, look into C11.
And I like that well, I like it in this case. I don't like that companies have the power to fight governments, but I do at least like that they're doing it in a way that I like it this time around. But yeah, I was very disappointed when... Seems like the protesters, the real problem was that they're disrupting American car production or something like that, which is the reason. And so apparently we're just subservient to the United States.
But even then, that's not a reason to call for emergency act.
Well, it is if the United States wants you to.
Yeah.
Which I don't like.
Yeah.
So in Parliament, he was debating with Pierre Poilievre, and what I really don't like is that, again, pointing to the tyranny thing, let's say that Trudeau has very different ideas about what would make Canadians safe, and he thinks this gun law is to keep Canadians safe. Then there's no reason for him to have lied to Pierre Poilievre and everyone when he called him out for banning a foul rifle, because he said this is only to ban assault weapons, and then Pierre said, no, look, you're banning this foul hunting rifle.
Yeah.
And he said, oh, you're just clearly in bed with the gun industry. He completely went for the ad hom instead of saying, yeah, I'm banning this gun because it'll keep people safe. He had to lie and shift blame in order to keep his tyranny hidden, essentially. Or not to keep his tyranny hidden, to stay a tyrant instead of even pretending he was trying to be a reasonable person.
Yeah.
And he's clearly not doing it out of any interest in people's safety, because then he would be using totally different language. You could have someone who is self-righteously and misguided, in my opinion, fighting to get guns banned in Canada.
Yeah.
And it'd be very misguided for a number of reasons. So I'll give an example. When I was little, I was playing with they lived on our property. She's not really my friend, but basically the same age as me. So we were like 1 or 2. And there was a black bear stalking the cabin.
Yeah.
And checking in on us, basically, to, look, 2 little kids.
Yeah.
And guns were very useful there for keeping the bear at bay, and as fail-safe if the bear ever did attack, it was able to get just chased off with gunshots.
Yeah.
So a bear banger would have potentially worked. But there was always the option, if the bear charged the cabin, we had the guns.
Yeah.
Well, the parents did, because we were 1 and 2. But there's many farms around where we live, and they get coyotes and bears attacking their livestock.
And wolves.
And dogs.
Yeah.
And guns are very useful there again for defending your livestock.
Yeah.
Then we have communities in the territories, like in Iqaluit and Old Crow and potentially Resolute, places like that, where especially Old Crow, I'm not actually sure about Iqaluit, but in Old Crow, I think the majority of their food in winter actually comes from hunting.
Yeah.
And so if you ban guns, you're starving people.
The trappers don't produce enough food.
And you're not going to get a deer with a trap.
Yeah, well, the trappers get smaller, bad tasting food.
You're going to get lynx and weasels and whatnot. And
yeah,
lynx is gross. I've had it, and
weasels are also gross.
Like, lynx is probably pretty high calorie, but it's disgusting.
And on the note of those trappers, even up there, they're going along. There's something caught in their line. And then something bigger comes along to destroy that line. That's their whole livelihood.
They're dealing with blood. They're in danger. They need protection when they're out there. If you're just like mining companies when they're doing exploration.
Yeah.
And people when they're doing tourism, it's useful to have a gun in case there's a bear or a wolf or something like that.
We still have giant animals of doom up here.
And there's this huge issue where the majority of place occupied is not in cities, but the majority of people are in cities. So people are making decisions for 80% of the country that they know nothing about.
Yeah.
Because they have more of them. And so city people are saying, well, why would you need a gun? Well, to stay alive.
Yes.
We need food. We need protection. And it's not even, like, the Americans have the argument, and I'm not even saying it's a bad argument in America, where
you should defend yourself from your government.
Or other citizens.
Yeah.
You should just be allowed to have a gun because we're a free society. You should be allowed to do what you want.
Yes.
And, guns are fun. You should be able to go and have fun with guns. And I think that's a good argument too. But in Canada, we have very specifically, at the very least, a need for guns in order to survive.
Yeah.
And sure, maybe that's only 10,000 people that'll starve if you ban all the guns. But that's still 10,000 Canadians.
Yes. And
you could say, well, 10,000 Canadians dying is better than the 10,000 a year that die from gun accidents already, or something like that, I guess. But that is, I've never liked arguments where you have to take away people's autonomy and responsibility in order to protect. It's for the greater good type argument. Yes. You should allow people to, like, let's say, if you walled off the ocean, you would have no more deaths related to the ocean, but no one was able to go into the ocean. That's not a world I want to live in. This is been used in various forms all over, but in Malazan Book of the Fallen, they have a king who is terrified of the world, so he erects a great wall around himself. But people can still get over it, so he puts a giant roof over the wall. And people can still rush his front gate, so he puts a great iron door on the wall, and they can still get in through the windows, so he bars the windows. They can still pick the locks, so he welds the door shut, and then he is safe. And he's built himself a prison.
Yeah.
And you need that freedom in order to exist within. Well, you don't need it, but if you want, that is not a... You can live in a country like that if you want, but not my country, for one thing.
Yes.
And that is not a country I think anyone would do well in, except a very small amount of people. There's stories of criminals when they get out of prison, they actually start missing prison because it was so regulated. It was very stable and safe. Yeah. So there are people that, freedom is scary to that extent. And I imagine you could have North Koreans like that who if they... But the thing, even then, the problem is North Korea isn't safe. You give away all your freedoms to be safe, and then you can't do anything because the government's still arbitrary and it still does stuff. Like China might be the best example we have on Earth of you give away all your freedoms for safety, because for the most part, the Chinese government isn't like full-blown dictatorial evil. But even then, they have a lot of problems.
The ridiculous amount of corruption within China just causes so many problems to them.
Like, when you give the government absolute authority over the lives of the citizens, the slightest bit of corruption becomes a massive issue.
Yeah. And China, from what I've read and watched videos on, China is almost run off corruption.
I don't know if you've seen, there's been these massive bank protests in China. Yeah. And the bank protesters will simultaneously get COVID notifications on their phone saying, you were in a COVID-exposed area, you need to go home. Yeah. Well, and so they're like, we're not destroying peaceful protest. We just have to enforce COVID laws.
Do you know why there's the bank protests?
Because people aren't allowed to withdraw their money from the banks.
Yeah, do you know why they're not allowed?
Because that would cause a run on the banks and that would
There's
collapse
no
the banks.
money.
Yeah, but that's true of all banks.
No, a guy stole it all. It's not that. All the money from a lot of banks was stolen.
Well, they had this issue with their building companies where...
Yeah, so the building company thing happened, and then they went to check even what they had left was missing a lot of individual banks because they're all linked together through a system because it's communism, so you link everything. And a guy made off with a ton of money.
The government was being forgiving on banks. They were allowing banks to go massively into debt, I believe it was. Yeah. And so the banks were giving out money that didn't exist to the building companies that were taking that money and not building buildings. And instead were buying more land to build buildings on. And the idea was that at some point it would all get paid back and paid forward. Mm-hmm. But instead it just ended up draining the banks, making the building companies super rich. But then when the building companies were asked, hey, where's our houses? That destroyed them. Yeah. And then the people are like, hey, we want our money from the banks. And the banks are like, we don't have any money.
Yeah, so that's happened on top of a guy robbing them.
Yeah, that doesn't sound good. How much can you rob though? Like, was it...
ridiculous amounts.
Like, because it doesn't seem to me you could rob like a national amount of money in any...
Well, there's a bunch of smaller banks that are all linked to the national.
Like, I guess you can... What was that guy? He was an American. He stole several $100 billion. Yeah. And then there's the more recent case with FTX where that was like tens of billions of dollars. Yeah. It's...
Yeah, so imagine that security level, but in banks. And so an insider in the banks just took the money and...
Yeah. Yeah, that's not good. They might be able to just... I don't know how that would work.
There's also a ridiculous video from the Chinese protests that's come out of it, which is, so their phones, they send you, you have COVID or not? Yeah. So the guy has his phone, it's green, it's inside, he doesn't have COVID. And he puts it out his window and his phone turns red and tells him you have COVID.
It's just location based.
Yeah, and so he just keeps switching it back and forth.
Wow. Yeah,
And also a huge spark from the protests were also Apple phone workers, guys who build the phones. They basically weren't getting paid very well, and they were getting forced to live inside the factories because of quarantine. And so a bunch of them left, saying, well, we're not working here anymore. And so then the government... Sorry, they weren't... So there's all that, and they just weren't getting paid at all. And so they left, and then the government said, oh, it was... Or I guess the company said, that was an error in our system. You should be getting paid. But anyways, we've also hired a bunch of workers to replace you. And so they kind of lost at that point and sieged the factories. And unlike getting quelled normally by the company's soldiers, they kept fighting.
I wonder what that would look like. on the ground. Well, let me put it a different way. 2 years ago, the United States had a massive amount of protests.
Yeah.
And if you weren't fairly closely connected to the States, it may have looked like the United States was falling apart.
Yeah.
And so I wonder what China looks like to the Chinese people. Is this the end times, or is this more like the United States riots, or even less?
Well, it's getting called Tiananmen 2.
Yeah, but that people will.
Yeah.
You will always want to be the news station that's the first to say that. Like, I think in the United States, my economic history is basically non-existent, but Nixon at one point dissolved the dollar's pegging on gold, which caused massive inflation, but he was essentially able to print as much money as needed to eliminate the economic issues they were having, which it vastly devalued American currency, but it allowed him to. It allows now the American government can essentially choose how much money they have.
Yeah.
And China can do that as well. And I wonder. I saw a video where they were saying this will look like a recession, probably not even a Great Depression or something like that. But it depends on the analysis I saw, because they could be wrong. But because you also had the issue in the United States in 2008 where the housing market was so overspeculated. When that bubble burst, trillions of dollars just disappeared.
Yeah.
And that caused a whole bunch of people to be very unhappy. But that didn't mean much for the United States as a country.
Well, didn't it destroy Detroit? Or was Detroit destroyed before that?
I don't know. I think Detroit has been a very violent city for much longer than 2008.
Yeah, I think it was. But it used to be the main, like one of the wealthiest cities in the States. With
Are you thinking of Portland?
No.
Detroit?
Yeah, so okay. Detroit was a car manufacturing city. It had a bunch of factories. And then when they exported manufacturing to China and car building buying from foreign places, Detroit basically got outcompeted and collapsed. And so it was one of the wealthiest cities in the States to one of the poorest in a couple of years. I guess it was earlier than 2008 that happened.
They also have quite a bit of problem with gang violence there, I believe.
Yes.
I think it's one of the most dangerous places on earth to live.
Yes, it is.
So, and I think guns are also illegal in Detroit.
Yes.
So, or maybe it's in Chicago, or maybe both. But in Chicago, guns are illegal. And you see the results of that. It doesn't stop them. Now, I do wonder about that. If you banned all guns in the States and you banned all guns in Canada, would that actually prevent criminals from getting guns? Because at some point, there's nowhere to get the guns from.
Yeah. Mexico.
Well, ban them in Mexico then.
It always goes up. You'd have to ban them in America.
Well, ban them everywhere.
Yeah.
And then do you still have... And then the governments have absolute control over all the citizens of the world.
Yeah.
Because it is a bit strange, isn't it?
It seems like some people want that. Some people want the government to have absolute control over them.
Yeah, so I was actually...
I know people who want that.
Thinking about this, right? To tie into what I was talking about a few episodes ago, where women were given the vote, right? And so this was... They were given responsibility.
Yes.
And now we know the voting distribution in the States. I don't know if you saw this, but the difference between women under the age of 28 and men under the age of 28, or maybe it was 25, something like that, was ridiculous. It was like maybe the number was 28 points, or maybe it was 40 points, but it was, let's say 28 to be on the conservative side. Yeah. There was a 28-point difference between voting. So you had 40% or something like that percent of women voted conservative, and 60% voted. Let's say 60% of women voted socialist, or left, versus 40% of men who voted right.
Yeah.
And so it was the biggest divide, because everywhere else it's fair. Like, women tend to vote a bit more left, but that's what it was. It wasn't about age at all. It was unmarried women.
Yeah.
Voted insanely far more left than anyone else. Or you could look at the data differently, and you could say that, well, no, you can't, because they were the difference from every other group. I was going to say, you could say that married men vote incredibly far right, but that doesn't work, because it was every group was normal and they were the massive outlier. So they massively disproportionately vote left. And so women were given this responsibility, this franchise, And the first thing they did with it is vote away the responsibility by asking for socialism. Because people don't want responsibility.
Yeah.
And it says, old Papa Hitler said. Oh my goodness. I feel like I shouldn't be saying women having the vote causes this issue. And it's like Hitler's, like in back to back.
Well, when you were talking earlier about something, I can't remember exactly what you were saying, but I was thinking about from a book I read recently. One of the characters is crying because like something happened, and he's this big man. And he gets up and wipes his tears. Like, I've got to stop acting so womanish.
But that, yeah, no, I'm not degrading women, or I'm not attempting to. But let's just go back to the Hitler quote for a moment, which is that people don't want responsibilities. It makes them feel as if they've been abandoned.
Yeah.
And that does seem to be the case for a lot of people, and for everyone, I think. You always want someone else to blame for your problems.
Yeah.
No matter who you are. Unless you are somehow wise enough to realize that the only way you can live a life where you have power and the ability to change your problems is actually one where you take responsibility for them. But I think the amount of people like that are very few and far between.
Yeah.
And
well, I think to a certain point, it's also people just seeing how they can get an advantage, and people get their advantages in different ways.
What do you mean?
Well, in London, there is a lot of subsidies for single mothers, and every single child you have as a single mother is like an extra $5,000 for whatever time period. And so some women have purposely gone pregnant to have a single child so they can get the support from the government.
Well, that doesn't make sense. Like, a kid's going to cost a lot more than $5,000.
Well, I think it's it's quite consistent payment.
Right, but I haven't seen the London law or the UK law, but I assume that no lawmaker would ever make the support amount greater than the cost of not having a child unless they very specifically wanted that situation to exist. And
well, it's a very high statistic.
But I can't think of any reason why you would want a bunch of single mothers in your country. I can think of a reason why you'd want a bunch of children in your country, but then you would make that money for having all children, not just for single mothers.
Yeah.
But if you wanted to incentivize single mothers, the only thing I can think of would be that you were saying, no, that doesn't even work, because you would be saying, look, all we have is single mothers, but we really want children, so we're going to help out single mothers. But even then, you would still help out all families, and they would just disproportionately be claimed by single mothers. So yeah, there's no reason you would want more single mothers in your country, unless you're trying to destroy your country, which is possible, but I'm going to hope that isn't the case.
Yes, it was a long time I heard about these statistics, so there's that.
There could also
I could have misinterpreted it.
Well, there could also be...
Because the people who were talking about it in the first place, they're saying that it's, instead of a person getting married to someone else, they're getting married to the state. So the state's their husband.
Right, so the problem they could be considering is that it is possible for single women to have children. And so what the person you were listening to would probably be complaining about would be the fact that single women can make the choice to have children because the government will support them.
Might have been it.
Which they couldn't do it on their own, but they will get just enough from the state, which makes the state the father. And then if you piss off the state, your children don't get any money. Yeah. And the children the children only see you bowing to the state instead of compromising with your husband. And that is a family dynamic, that is a problem. But, and their problem could be that you're not incentivizing marriage at that point. Yeah. Because you could cynically say that women can always get pregnant, and if they have no reason to... It's kind of a low view of men, but it could be true where the only reason that men have families is because they can provide for them. I mean, being a provider isn't a bad thing, but if you're saying that if women had more freedom, they would choose not to have a man to be a provider, that is quite sad. But it is possibly true. In Mein Kampf, Hitler talks about how he's actually quite pro-trade union. So he thinks that the unions are a great way for...
Didn't he destroy the unions?
I don't know. But he thinks that... Now, I can see a reason why he might have, but I'll say why he's for them. So there's a...
Yeah, I'm pretty sure he abolished the unions.
I can see why he'd abolish them and still be for them. Okay. So he didn't blame anyone for joining the trade union because the working class in Austria was getting treated very poorly by the leaders of the country, the bourgeoisie, as the communists would call them, and as Hitler called them. And they weren't doing anything to make their lives better or easier or anything like that. Of what I was getting at with Hitler, rephrasing it, why would anyone want to destroy their country, as in the UK, if that was the case? Although I think it probably is more just the fact that the state was replacing fathers would be the concern there. But Hitler was for the trade unions because they were a way for the working class to unite and gain power in their uniting against the government. Because the government and the people at the top of the companies are united in the sense that they have a lot of power, they have a lot of money, and money is essentially a form of social power and uniting, which is what Marx said as well. Yeah. So if you have a lot of power, influence, and money, you essentially are an army unto yourself, and the only way you can counter an army is with another army, so that's what a union allows you to do. Ah. It allows you to speak up for yourself. And
there's another way to counter an army, a nuke.
I don't think that assassination would get change. It would just cause the rest of the state to crack down on you.
It's not assassination.
Yeah, it is, because the closest analog to a nuke would be just ignoring the fight altogether and taking out the person wholesale. I'm not talking about physical conflict. I'm talking about political power. Yeah. And if you want change to happen, then you need to unite into a union.
Okay.
What do you mean by a nuke, then?
Well, I was thinking armies can deal with armies. That's the metaphor there. You need an army to deal with an army. That's what he was saying.
No, that's what I said.
Yeah. So I was thinking a nuke can also deal with an army.
Right, but what does that mean? And the only thing I can think of is that would mean assassination.
I guess. I mean...
How do you deal with a corrupt business tycoon without protesting against him en masse?
Obliteration?
And what does that mean?
Well, I guess assassination could be that, or destruction of all property.
You can't destroy all his property if you're one person.
Well, if you have a nuke, you can.
Why would you have a nuke? And why are you using it to destroy your means of production?
I don't know. It was a thought that got away from me. It seemed to work in the moment.
Right.
But after thinking it through, it doesn't.
Hitler didn't like trade unions as they existed because the socialists were at the head of them. And the socialists had risen to the head by saying that we most represent the interests of the working class. And what the trade unions allowed them to do was amass a large amount of political power that they could control. And then the trade unions, once they had, these Marxists and socialists had this massive amount of political power, they were able to make changes in the government. And so people would ask for small concessions from the government, like we want slightly shorter working hours, or we want minimum wage, or whatever it might be. And the trade unions would say, no, you don't want these things. And they would actually actively block the government from improving the lives of the workers. And what they told the workers was, this is the government's way of trying to appease you, to keep you downtrodden and oppressed. You must hold firm until they give you everything you want. Mm. And the governments they never took their own initiative to actually implement these measures that the trade unions were also not pushing for to improve the life of the working class. So the working class just grew even more disenfranchised feeling. And so they flocked even more to the trade unions. And so the trade unions continually grew in power. Yeah. And the best way that the trade unions could grow in power was to fight against the very thing they're advocating for on the surface.
Yeah, well, once the trade union gets what it wants, there's no longer a point for it exists. So it exists to perpetuate itself.
And even more than that, the people in charge didn't care about the trade union at all. They cared about the communist revolution. They wanted the destruction of the country, but they needed a large enough base first. And the way to grow the base was to make the country worse and worse and worse. So you could say that in the case of the government in the UK, there could be actors in there trying to destroy the government or destroy the family to get what they want. But, well, the thing is, there are people like that. I don't know if there's enough of them in positions of power to actually do anything.
There's that thing from Jordan Peterson, which is, it's easier to believe that sort of malevolence does not exist in the government.
Yeah.
Than to look at it and actually see it for what it is.
Well, it's really interesting so our mom was talking about the truckers' protest. I don't know if you were there or not. And she was saying, there's like no one that actually agrees with the truckers. They're just this crazy lunatic fringe. And my thought when she said that was quite surprised, because I thought there's hardly anyone that disagreed with the trucker protest.
Mm.
And now I don't listen to CBC very much, and she listens to CBC almost exclusively for news. And I think that could be the difference. And also her friends that she would talk to also listen to CBC. But the question there is, obviously she's out of touch, but the question is, how far out of touch am I?
Yes.
Because I will readily dismiss... So the thing that always gets brought up, which I think is kind of weird, is the truckers blocked the United States-Canada border. And that is the big thing. Because that's one of the only negative things they did, I guess. But I find it weird that that's made such a big point, because that's an economic issue. And when the Keystone Pipeline was protested, they were blocking international economic agreements.
Yeah.
And that wasn't... Like, Trudeau went down and shook the hands of the people there. Mm. He took a knee with them. So it seems rather hypocritical that, especially since it seems to be the left that is most adamant about the fact that the truckers block the border, when they are the ones who say it's not about the money all the time. When it... And I can... The problem is, right, it's a really good argument, because what they're saying is it's about the money. And anyone that agrees with the trucker protest is going to... Because money is freedom, right? And so anyone that agrees with the trucker protest is going to be like, well, you got me there. But the problem is they themselves don't believe that.
Yeah.
So you can actually... And this is why I think Vosh said what he said. You can defeat someone with their own principles and remain unassailable yourself. Well,
also, the truckers, before the jackboots cracked down on them, the EU or wherever they were, forces that weren't completely Canadian, they actually had unblockaded those areas.
You know, I don't know the details of that, so...
Yeah,
I'll say sure.
Yeah.
Or I'll say maybe they didn't, and even then, you can't do that. See, if you could say that the truckers blocking the border... Let's say that they didn't leave the border, right, and it was awful. And it would be... I said this before the protests were over, and it didn't end up happening as far as I'm aware, except maybe in very small cases with the Nazi flags and whatnot. But what I said is how I would defeat those protests is I would incentivize the protesters to violence, or I would have my own protesters ostensibly on their side doing something that was universally considered reprehensible.
Yeah.
And we saw that in a few cases with the flags.
And the building burner.
There's a building burner.
A guy tried to light a fire to a building.
Yeah, okay, so something like that. And that is the kind of person that... Yeah, an arsonist would be perfect. You just need to hire one guy, you give him $1 million to burn down a building, and say he's part of the protests. And suddenly you can destroy an entire protest movement.
Yeah.
And that is... Like, that's how you could... Maybe that was done. Like, civil rights movement in the States, like, that would be pretty easy. You got, we just want rights. It's like, you want rights, but you got a bunch of these black guys lynching some white guys on their farm. And it's like, you're so peaceful, are you? And then you can just destroy them. That didn't seem to happen, thankfully. But the fact that people are saying the border protests... Like, I think the border protests were legitimate protesters. I don't think they're government agents. But even then, if a protest is big enough, it's going to contain bad actors or idiots. Yeah. Or they're just going to be doing stuff you don't disagree with. Like, I think it's very weird that protests shouldn't be inconvenient.
Yeah, no. Well, especially, so you want to be heard, and a person doesn't even deem to respond with you, or they insult you.
Yeah, they flee to the other side of the country.
Yeah. To
their home in Tofino or wherever it was. Yeah.
And so you make it bigger. Like, one of the main things to think about is the Blind Guardian song about Cromwell taking over. And the line, "We will not be silent anymore, our voices will be heard."
Yeah, if you don't listen to the people, they're going to get louder.
Yeah, and a large part of it, in the many cases, and people are like, why is it like this? Or why are people acting like this for whatever political issue? Is because they want to be heard.
Yeah.
Because they've been silent for so long, because they were like, I'll put up with that. Yeah, I'll put up with that. And it's the final straw. It's like, no, I'm going to be heard now.
I think... People can also think there's issues when there are none.
Yes.
And what is the difference?
Well, you can also gaslight yourself into thinking that in multiple layers.
No, there is a difference. It's just the question is what? How do you know that you are So we did something recently. We did something bad, very bad. Yeah. We burned a book that we didn't like. It was the book we were talking about last time. Where did I come from?
Yeah.
And I showed it to you, and I reread it, and you read it for the first time, apparently. Or you had really blocked it out of your mind.
Yeah.
And it's got some...
Well, when I had first seen it, I couldn't read at that time, so I'd only looked at the images of the book.
Images are disturbing as well.
Yeah.
So it's got...
But as I was watching it, I realized that's why I wasn't familiar, because you give me a title, and I couldn't even read titles, so...
So it's got a bunch of naked people in it, and it's a book for, I think the age rating on it says 6 to 8-year-olds or 4 to 8-year-olds, something like that.
Yeah.
4 to 10-year-olds, somewhere in there. And I don't think that is wrong in of itself, in the right context. Naked people, and yeah, I think that's fine. But they're very... First of all, they're having sex, which is kind of...
gratuitous.
Yeah, unfortunately, they do put like a sheet over them for that section, but they are naked in a lot of scenes. But they are hideous people. They're like weird, lumpy troll people.
Yeah.
And there's a bunch of naked babies, and naked babies, you see cherubs and great Renaissance paintings and whatnot. That's okay as well.
And embarrassing photos of yourself when you're a baby and your parents go, haha, look at him, he's naked and vulnerable.
Yeah, or what's Unsounded, where I think it's called, the thing with the zombie and the little girl with the tail. Yeah. She draws the little girl in that naked sometimes, and she's like 8 or something. But there's... The nakedness is a sign of, in many of these cases, of their innocence. Yeah. Whereas in this book, they are directly talking about and looking at their own genitals. And that gets a little bit weird there. Like, there's a scene where the kid's looking at his little penis, and the text says, "Don't worry, it'll grow bigger," or something like that.
Yeah.
Or "It'll grow bigger," something like that. And that's just a bit weird.
It says this grows as you grow.
Yeah. And they're... the paintings are all very grotesque as well. They're not, like, people you would ever want to look at. And I don't even mean sexual. I mean, aesthetically, you are looking at trolls, not humans.
Yeah.
And all of that is just sort of like poor taste, but you could say, okay, like the first couple pages of the book, if you just grab the book and read the first 3, 4, 5 pages, you're like, okay, I kind of like some of the text, and the pictures are bad, but they're not, maybe they're offensive to my Puritan eyes, but there's some people out there that won't mind. But then it goes into this like 3-page description of how good sex feels, and like play-by-play description of how it feels, basically. And it's like, do you want
8 to 12-year-olds?
Or no, it's 6 to 10-year-olds or something like that.
6 to 10-year-olds, yeah.
Like I was thinking about this, right? Oh, well, kids should be protected from sex. You see that sort of thing. That tends to be a conservative opinion. And then you see a lot of people, wow, you're so conservative, you need to get over this. Like, it's natural and that sort of thing. And the more progressives are right, it is natural. You grow up on a farm, you learn a lot about animal breeding and whatnot.
Yeah.
And you're exposed to that at a very young age, and people have been exposed to that from a very young age throughout all of history, and it's not... Obviously, it's not devastating, or at least not so much that the human species couldn't continue. But there's a difference between talking about it, and about making it seem like something the kids would want to do.
Yes.
And the very fact that someone is, through a book, talking to your kids about how great sex is pretty creepy on itself.
Yeah.
But even if it was written by other children, let's say, that weren't pedophiles or something like that, you're still encouraging a behavior that society has been trying to avoid for the past 100 years, which is child pregnancies and teen pregnancies and that sort of thing. And so it seems at the very least bad on that front for preventing that. And also, I don't know, you can't really overstate the hideousness of the people in the sense that it turns you off of, that method. I'm trying to think of a good example that's analogous, but that method of, if you catch I've heard this has backfired many times, but you catch your kid smoking and you're like, well, you got to finish the whole pack, and the kid's just so horrified by it that he never smokes.
Traumatizing them off it. Yeah.
You see this book with 3-page description of sex, and you see these hideous naked people and all this. It is sort of one of those. It's like when you overexpose film, it kind of sears and breaks, and it's a bit much. So I don't think the book is a good book, and I wish I had never read it and been given it. And I think that nobody should read it, and that it's. I mean, if you want to read it as an adult, just read it for a laugh or nice feeling of hit of outrage or something, go for it. But I don't think any kid should be reading it. Well, maybe like once you're 10 or 11 or 12, you can probably just take this book and laugh at it and say, "Oh, look at these stupid." Like that's like even pedophiles are just things that make kids laugh at the age of 12 because you become sort of in the right if you're in a safe environment and it's removed from you, you become basically invincible where you just mock pedophiles endlessly.
Yeah.
I remember when Michael Jackson had those accusations against him. It was around when I was 12, and everyone was just like, "Oh, look, Michael Jackson's going to get me." Like kids just they become very bulletproof in that sense. It's actually a great feature of kids. But didn't like the book. I stuffed it in your... I gave it to you. I should have done that in the first place.
Yes, I said I will destroy this if you give it to me, and you gave it to me.
Although, I mean, if the lion says, I'll eat you if you come into my den, the lion's still the one that kills you.
Yeah. Well, you shouldn't go into the lion's den.
No, you shouldn't go into the lion's den either. But there is responsibility on both parties. But I didn't discourage you in any way. And I probably even made it seem like it was something I was in favor of, and which I was in the moment, I think, as well. So that's why I say we burned it, because that was definitely... I, as the wise, older, guiding figure, So anyways, book ended up getting burned. Which really undercuts basically everything we've done on this channel. And undercuts a lot of political and philosophical beliefs about, not being overcome by self-righteousness and that sort of thing. Yeah. So I'm going to buy a copy, and another copy of it, and put it back in the place. And so these people are going to make money off of that. But the thing is, you can't set a precedent of burning books, even if you completely disagree with them and they're abhorrent. That's what the best example I can think of is what the Catholics did to the Mayans books. Because the Mayans told terrible, devilish lies that lead people into hell about the origins of humanity. Yeah. And the Catholic priests were completely righteous in their burning of these books. And 500 years later, we have lost potentially the most important documents in history.
The arrogance of thinking you know what is right and making a decision so that no one else can ever know.
Yeah, there's this, even if...
And that's what I did there, even in choosing burn, is I had the arrogance that this book is knowledge that no one else should know.
There's even a sense, let's say 50 years from now.
Yeah.
Like, why was everyone born in the 90s so messed up? They will have no way to figure it out because they won't be able to find any copy of that book in existence.
Yeah.
Whereas if the books exist, then you can say, oh, this book is the thing that ruined them.
Yeah.
You can't hide... If you hide away the evil, it will get dug up and no one will understand it. Mm-hmm. Whereas if you describe the evil and keep it, maybe under lock and key, but you keep it. And that's what the Catholic Church actually does a lot of the time. I am still... There is reason to believe they actually saved a decent amount of the documents from the Mayans and everywhere else. Because they have some crazy stuff in their vaults. Like, they had a copy of the Dead Sea Scrolls, I think, already. And they just never released it. So they actually might have already known what they were doing in some sense. But I would really like it if by now they started, like, talking about it, because...
What's in the Vatican's vaults?
Yeah.
Please.
Because there's some very interesting information that's been lost to basically every other archive in history, except like maybe the Rothschilds' libraries, because I've heard they've got some crazy libraries, and then the Vatican.
Yeah.
And the other aspect of it is, if that was my book, I think I wouldn't be buying another copy because, well, it's my property and I can do what I want with it.
Yeah.
But it wasn't, well, it's sort of I'm not sure how to think about it. I've been wondering about this. When you buy a kid toys, you're often not giving it to them. Like the kid feels like it is, and I think that maybe the kid should be giving them.
Here's an interesting one for you. So, when we were both younger, we lived right near a pastry shop, basically.
Did we? Oh, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, that's the best view of it.
Sure. That's making it seem a lot nicer than it is.
Yes, I'm making it charmed.
Yeah. So there was a place where they would heat up frozen dough.
No, they actually bake them.
Yeah, but they don't make the dough. They just get it ordered in.
Yeah. And we would go there with our dad, and we'd be allowed to select one pastry, and we usually get muffins because if you could get one thing, they're like the most dense and best of them. And we'd be given these muffins, and our dad would demand a tithe of part of their like muffin top crust, which is the best part. And we'd always kind of be reluctant to give him that tithe. But I was reflecting upon it, he was buying those. And if he'd, like, this sort of like teaching, sharing, like, oh, I get a toy, but if he'd gone for approach of, he'd go buy 2 muffins, take a piece off both of them, eat them, and then like, here, have a muffin to us. We might have accepted the muffins better that way than, oh, I don't want to give away something that's now mine to you.
Yeah, I guess there is an aspect there. And with the toys, like my stepsister has a kid, and they wanted to give him some Tonka trucks, which are mine. And, well, that's the thing. I view them as mine. They didn't. They viewed them as the kid toys that are now in the family to be given to whatever kid comes along next. And it is a very different view of, well, then why was it given to me at my birthday? Why wasn't it just always there?
Yeah.
Like, if it's not at my birthday, then you can say, yeah, sure, this is just...
I think part perspectively of that is that was a toy given at a fairly young age, and most people don't have a memory that views you of when you receive toys.
I don't know, like, I've never actually looked into this, but I was talking about how, as you interrupted last episode, I believe, I had severe back pain as a kid, and I would tell people about it, and no one would believe me. They'd say I was over-exaggerating or whatnot, and I was just in incredibly massive pain, and no one believed me, and that made it even worse, because, you know, kids do over-exaggerate, but it was really bad pain. So, on a Stitch and Adam video, I was talking about this, because they were talking about how a kid committed suicide, or attempted suicide for attention. And I was talking about how when I was really little, I had this pain, and I never did anything even in the slightest to try to get attention. I had a hope. Like, I had this hope that the pain would kill me, and that would show them all. And the doctors would find my body, and they'd be able to see my, like, twisted spine, and they'd be like, this kid died from pain. How could we have doubted him? And that's what I wanted. But I never sought suicide. I just hoped I would die from the pain, so that I could show everyone how wrong they were about doubting me.
Man, you've been dealing with self-righteousness for a long time.
I've said it before, I'm fueled by spite.
Most people say that ironically, but in your case...
No, I was willing to die for the cause.
Yeah, no, that's why I say, like, a lot of people are, like, ironically, like, I'm fueled by spite or whatever, but... No,
I don't know if I said this on the podcast or not, but it's only been the last year and a half, really, where I've been really trying to deal with the spite. And the main thing I've been dealing with is how resentment and spite hurts you so badly. Yeah. And I said that, you know, if it hurt other people even half as much as it hurt me, I might consider it worth it. But the fact is that it doesn't hurt them at all. like you know, like the Buddhist saying, resentment is drinking poison and hoping the other party dies. Yeah. But what if you could drink 2 doses of poison and they would die? Then we're talking.
Yeah.
But the thing is, you don't hurt them at all, and you destroy yourself.
Yeah.
And I know
the Buddhist sayings would be very different if you could drink 2 vials of poison and have someone else die.
Yeah.
They'd have to come up with different analogies.
Yeah. What if your corpse is just so toxic and you hate like a corpse disposal guy, and it's the only way.
Well, you could make it even darker, as your spite is you kill yourself by burying yourself in a wall right next to a vent, like drill a hole in the vent, so you're
spread plague.
Yeah.
I'm not that. Oh, that is too. I'm not that resentful.
Yeah.
I think I would just try to like stab the guy at that point, like even if my odds of success were low. I don't think I would go that, especially since, like, what if they're not in the house for a
couple of days?
Yeah, like that's low payoff chance and very high cost.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I relayed the story on the Stitch and Adam thing where they're talking about kid suicide, and I was saying, even when I wanted to die from pain, I never even considered suicide.
Well, even on the attractiveness of it, just to interrupt you again, is the whole thing, from hell's heart I spit at you.
Yeah.
That's, like, when you hear that statement, from hell's heart I strike at you, or hell's heart I spit at you, you go, oh, like that. Yeah. That's a good feeling statement, even though it's actually quite nasty.
Well, it's very good in the moment. It's like sugar. You're like, woo, and you're awake. And then, bam, there's a crash, and you're in pain. And so the only way...
An important part of that statement is from hell's heart.
Yeah.
Because if you're in heaven, you're... Like, even the statement, see you in hell, is implying that I will be in hell waiting for you so I can torture you.
Yeah.
Along with the torture. You go... So, see you in heaven. Oh, ha, 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 ha. You're like, maybe, see you in heaven. And you're like, happy little smile.
Yeah. See you in heaven, punk. We'll have parties together. Tea.
Yeah.
But I wrote about this experience in Stitch and Adam's comments about how I had experienced this massive amount of pain. And I didn't consider suicide whatsoever. And I got a reply where someone said, children don't remember anything until they're 7 or 8. Like, you're lying. How could you make this stupid lie? And I'm pretty sure most kids remember stuff after they're 4.
Yeah.
But I don't actually know. I assume that 4 is sort of the rough cut-off age. But I know a lot of people that have memories going back to 2.
Neurologically, this isn't even like theoretical about people. Neurologically, the parts of your brain start to activate and actually put together that hold memory, because different parts of your brain don't fully form and activate until development. And development happens at different rates. People who have like perfect memory from the age of 1 are usually babies that were in the womb too long. So it took very long.
So they're already older.
Yes.
Yeah.
And also there is acceleration from there. But besides that, you don't...
You're like 2 months late and you come out an old man. Yeah. Accelerational forces in there. Crazy. Yeah. Just come out with a cane. Oh, it's twins. Wait, no, it's just a cane.
So you actually start developing memory from 2 to 4, and maybe some people could be premature and develop later. But like in the brain, actual brain chemistry, memory starts happening around 2 to 4.
Birth canal has a porch installed on it. It's just an old wrinkled baby in a rocking chair.
Was it that story about the guy aged backwards?
Benjamin Button?
Yeah.
Merlin?
Yeah, Benjamin Button's more common.
Yeah, sorry, so neurologically.
Yeah, neurologically you start developing your memory from 2 to 4.
And I think...
And it fully, like all brain things in men fully develop around 25.
If I recall correctly, I could be wrong here, and I don't know if you know this, but memory is related to language.
That too.
Like, memories are basically stories that you're telling yourself. And so the earlier you develop some form of storytelling capacity, not necessarily language.
Yeah.
But the earlier you develop a storytelling capacity, the earlier your memories will be.
Interesting case of a guy with photographic memory, or near to. So there's a whole show that was done about him, and he was a high functioning autist, and he had incredibly severe autism. Like, the levels are, if you were to measure them without his high functioning, and the high functioning is basically he can blend in with society and socially interact. So if you were to measure his levels without that, he would be like considered one of the worst cases of like people who need constant assistance in their life, but he can operate fine. And his memory is based in shapes and numbers, but that's because numbers are basic shapes. And so he has a very early memory, has a photographic memory, he can do amazing thing with maps. He learned a language that's considered almost impossible to learn in 3 months. But he remembers everything in objects and colors. So when he thinks about stories and events in his life, he thinks about the objects and colors. And so his self-narrative is very weird.
Yeah, I'm curious about how individuals store memories and how they differ. Because I do think, I think synesthesia is probably just a different set of connections in the brain for memory and sensation.
What is synesthesia? Is that?
That's where you can taste and smell and whatnot colors, I think. But that, I'm trying to think of the other thing where numbers and whatnot have colors. Numbers and letters have colors. So 2 is green and 5 is blue, that sort of thing.
Well, there's associations that people do. Like this, a lot of dyslexic people have emotional associations with the alphabet and numbers.
Yeah.
Like I particularly don't like the letter E, even though it's very common. I find it sneaky.
Yeah.
And I find the letter 3 also kind of sneaky, and 3 and E are actually very similar shapes. Structurally.
Yeah, so that's what because I think that the brain is not... I think computer storage is physical. Like, you have section A contains thought A, section B contains thought B. I think brains are doing something massively more efficient, massively more clever, but
it's association.
But it causes some very weird connections.
Yeah, well, so you could say to someone, just spell the word could, or just spell the word because.
Yeah.
And they're like, okay, I can spell it. I've memorized how to spell it. And so it's like, oh, it's just a simple association memory. Just the words go together. That's how it goes. Whereas I think they're called mnemonics or phonemics. It's where you have a story about them.
Yeah, mnemonics, yeah.
Yeah, I have mnemonics to memorize those. And other people go, well, isn't a mnemonic even like more to memorize? And so that's, if you look at it from a computer's perspective,
it's way more to memorize.
It's a huge amount more.
But what it's more akin to is compression.
Yeah.
So it's a lot more efficient than store a movie. Say, for these 10,000 frames, every one of these pixels is green. That takes up way more space than saying 10,000 times, this is a green pixel. And so you can compress files that way. Yeah. And you can compress them in all sorts of ways. Like, okay, we have a pattern here of 111001100, and this pattern happens 12 times in these different spots. And it can be more efficient to record that pattern.
Oh, that's how compression works.
Cool.
I just thought it was magic.
It can be more efficient to record that pattern than it is to store the entire sequence. Yeah. And now I don't know much about computers, so maybe my interpretation of compression is way off, but that's how I would do it.
It seems about right.
And if I recall correctly, that is how it's done, but it's being, I don't know.
Yeah.
It would work anyways, even if that's not how it's done.
Yeah.
And I can't think of any other way they would do it, so there you go.
Well, like I said, I just thought it was magic.
Yeah. And I think that's what human brains are doing on a far denser, greater scale, is you say, okay, what's the difference between 7 green friendly and like a crocodile? Yeah. Nothing. They're all the same object. And that allows you to store information much more densely.
Yeah. Well, I go through these things which are really annoying, which are suppression cascades, which is, so there's certain events, like something that was very repulsive to me when I was a kid, or something that scared me, or like a thing that gave me an uneasy feeling.
I won't think about it. I won't think about the fact that I'm not thinking about it. I won't think about it.
Yeah, so there's that there. But then I see something disgusting or disturbing. And it's like, oh, I don't want to think about this. I'm going to like try to scope it out. And by doing that, I'm going to try to scope it out. It goes bing and links all the other things I've tried to scope out. And each one starts appearing. Then I remember that one. Then I remember that one. Then I remember that one.
Well, that's how phobias work. An object becomes the representation of evil. It becomes every bad thing that has ever happened or that you've ever thought could happen.
I feel like a lot of people have experienced this at some point. But as a kid, it's particularly disturbing. Maybe not everyone. Correct me if I'm wrong. But you know where you have the feeling that there's an eyeball in your mouth?
Nope.
No?
Nope.
No, okay. So, like, there's an empty space in your mouth.
I used to have a feeling I had a third nose.
Okay. Where's this?
I know. That's the weird part.
Yeah, but, so, when I was lying there, I'd get this empty feeling in my mouth, like there's something wrong in my mouth. And I thought that there's an eyeball in my mouth, sort of like perfectly filling the space of my teeth and on my tongue. And it was there, and I could feel it there. And it was this awful feeling. And I would try to not think about it, be there, even though there's nothing in my mouth. And like even I'd move my tongue around so it wouldn't be there, but I'd just squish around because eyeballs are squishy.
Weird. Yeah, no.
Another thing I had, so I had a phobia of people lifting up their shirts.
Okay.
And where it came from is I had a dream at one point when I was very young, which there's basically this alien infection which gave people on their belly buttons basically like a dick or something, like this growth. And it was really gross and disturbing in the dream.
Yeah?
Yeah. Quite body horror.
Yeah.
And I was worried that the thing would happen in real life, and so I didn't like people exposing their midriffs.
Did I tell you about how probably came from you saw someone with an Audi and you're...
Well, no, it made me particularly not like Audis as well.
Yeah. Man, it's gotta be rough. Yeah. Yeah. Did I tell you about how I used to think I liked stories with body horror, and then I read one or saw one. Like I watched Bone and Shadow. Yeah. I think it's called.
Yeah.
Where they like fuse the antler to her collarbone, and I was like, okay, no, I don't like this at all.
Yeah.
This is not a genre I like. It's a genre I thought I liked, and then I saw it, and I don't like it.
Yeah.
I don't know why I thought I liked it. I guess it's similar. Maybe I saw an association with scars where, like, There's this
It tells a story.
It's an interesting change that's unique to the person.
Yeah.
But the thing is, the interesting change also has to be like not disgusting.
Yeah.
Like if someone has their nose cut off and it's just constantly weeping mucus, that isn't interesting. That's just ugh.
Yeah, there's a guy at the CGC who has a nose patch.
Oh. Huh.
Like he has this white sheeted plate over where his nose should be.
You could have fun with that. Like not the fact that it happened, but given the opportunity, I don't know, you could like put a little clown nose like drawing on it or something, or no, and I don't. Yeah, I'm not going to say I'm. Yeah,
but yeah,
you got to do what you got to do with what you've got.
Yeah. But those memory cascades are from the linking system, basically going, oh, there's a link of things you don't want to remember.
Here's the bin of memories you shouldn't think about.
And I think that's possibly like actual triggering and actual...
Yeah, no, that's exactly what it is. Yeah.
Memory tax is that happening.
And that's how rumination happens, where you just start going through the list in endless circles, and you don't escape it.
But now, even when the cascade happens, I think I'm actually just a lot more mentally strong, where I go, yeah, I can see why that disturbed me. Well, it's not going to ruin me anymore. I still have trouble touching pictures of spiders, but I can do it now.
Or maybe you go numb.
Maybe I've gone numb.
I've wondered about that before. There's things that I've seen that I disturb me, right? Mm-hmm. And I think this is wrong, this is repugnant, this is whatever. And I see them enough, and I just start not caring. And I think, is that good or bad? Like, I can give an example that doesn't apply to me. Applies to police officers and most people my age when they were kids, for the ones that didn't have friends. They'll go and they watch videos of people being killed or getting hit by cars or just bodies, or you'd watch like bodies rotting, stuff like that. Website, what was it called? Live Leak, where you could just see like security footage of like cars hitting people and whatnot. That was something that unsupervised kids used to do with the internet. Not really anyone I knew, but I've now read about a lot of kids doing it. And I think they were probably kids that, they're the weird kids in the corner that didn't have any friends, is my theory. And they aren't as disturbed by that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Right? And like police officers, that's a more good example in a way, you could say. They get numb to it, right?
Yeah.
And the question is that numbness good or bad?
I avoid those things. I try to avoid them as much as I can in media. And part of my thought is I want to stay disturbed by them. So I don't want to see them at all. But I also don't want to go, oh yeah, that's that again. Oh yeah, that's that. It's like, no, this is horrible. You can't just post that.
But you also want to be able to step up to the plate when the time comes.
Yeah, you want to be able to step up, but you can't just post that.
But what about seeking it out? Like forget, like let's say it gets posted just due to automated security or whatever.
Yeah.
What about seeking it out? Is there something wrong with seeking it out?
I think so.
And what about the police officer? It's just part of the duty, right? They're not looking for it. They're not seeking it out. No one's created it on purpose.
Well, there's the whole trope of the rookie throwing up when he sees the first death.
But does that make the rookie a worse or better person than the hardened detective?
It doesn't make them a worse or better person. It makes them more like the hardened detective. Now, the judgment is that person you want to be at that point.
Because you could argue
it makes you more of a person that can deal with that.
Yeah, and what advantages does the rookie have? They can give death its due deference.
Yeah. Now, police officers are the people that make it so the rest of us can give it its due deference because they deal with it all the time.
But similar to the idea of the government taking care of everything.
Yeah.
Do you want to be the sheep that hide from the wilderness behind the city walls? Or do you want to be the ones that go out into the wilderness and can deal with the wolves and the whatever else? You hear stories about police officers where they talk about non-police officers as if they're a different
it's
class or
far
species.
More particular with military where they talk about civilians.
Yeah, and now the counter-argument potentially is another group that does that is porn actors. They talk about civilians as well. But you go to like a banker and a baker. They don't see themselves as a different entity or class, whereas the porn actors and the police officers do consider themselves as part of a different class. And detective novels, right? They're very popular because people get to be a part of that class. In the moment, they get to be the tough guy that isn't bothered by anything and can snort at the rookie. And is that something?
I remember in I think it was grade 11 biology. We were dissecting a frog. And that was the first animal dissection I'd done because I'd missed like the crayfish and I'd missed the sheep's eye. Like, I don't know how I managed if I missed all those days. I was sick or something. So the frog's a pretty big step up. And I had butchered a bison before to a certain extent, but even then it kind of affected me. But the frog really got me because the dissection of the frog was for the purpose of dissecting a frog. It wasn't for getting meat.
Yeah.
And so I was getting really disturbed by having to dissect it. And the teacher was kind of like, stop, just suck it up and do it. And so it's like, okay, fine, I will. And the feeling was I basically like numbed myself in that moment to it. But then after I dissected the frog, I was getting onto the bus, I was going home, and I felt really weird because I was having trouble feeling other emotions. Like, I numbed all emotions in the moment so I could do that. Then I was having trouble feeling at all. I got worried that I was having trouble feeling stuff.
But the question is, like, you don't want to cultivate hysteria either.
Yeah.
And so being able to control your emotions is important.
Mm-hmm.
Now, on the biology, that is actually a good counterexample in some ways because... Like I said, I wanted to be a biologist so I could create mermaids, and I loved animals. Mm-hmm. Like, I really love animals still. I find them fascinating and want to learn all about them. But that's not what biologists do. Basically, a biologist's job is to torture and dissect animals.
Yeah.
They just...
Play with corpses.
Not even corpses, though. Like, you know, sometimes they want to see the blood flow through a spider or something, so they'll like peel off its exoskeleton. And, that's how that works. And what if we to figure, like, you hear all these fun facts, right? Like, spiders can climb up glass. How does that work? The way they test that is they'll do stuff like they'll wrap the spider's feet in wax so that it can. They'll wrap its abdomen in wax so that it can't add silk to its feet to see if it actually has silk producing things in its feet or if it's just taking it from its abdomen. And then they'll set it on the glass and see if it doesn't fall off still.
Yeah.
Or they'll, for a lot of insects, they'll do something like, so it has this pattern of actions. What if we took away 3 legs? Would it still follow that pattern or would it adapt? Yeah. And that's sort of how they can determine intelligence. Is it just following a program or is it thinking it through?
And even further science, I know a lot of people bemoan it, but ethic committees are a very important part of us stopping scientists who just want to know things from going beyond the pale.
So you know that thing where someone does something like it's a joke in a lot of movies where they will be running through the street naked with like a cape made out of daffodils or something. Mm. And people will be like looking at them like, what's this freak doing? And they'll yell, for science! And you're like, oh, okay, haha. That is no justification whatsoever.
Yeah.
The act of science is not, the pursuit of science is not a noble goal in of itself whatsoever.
Yeah.
And it's often used as if it is. Now, I think the joke might be that that's the point, but you also see that as an excuse online sometimes when someone's like, hey, can you show me these links for science? Like, it doesn't matter if it's for science or not. Like, oh, look at this. I want to know what this attractive looking woman's naked pictures are. Can you show me the links for science? And it's like, it doesn't care. Who cares if it's for science?
Yeah.
You don't get to you don't put yourself above morality just because you're a scientist.
Yeah. It's not an excuse. It's not even like it's.
That's what was his name? Joseph Engels did. Whatever his name was. The German guy. Or Unit 731. Apparently, I don't know if this is true. It's been spreading recently, so that makes me think it's not true because you think I would have heard about it earlier. But the reason we know the human body is 72% water is because in Unit 732 they weighed a body and then they dried it out and they weighed it again. So they essentially stuck it in like a giant, I don't know, jerky machine. And
things though that he did, I won't be surprised. Like that's even a dead body. That's
nicer than in Unit 732 or 731, whatever it was called. They did stuff like they would cut off arms and stick them onto legs and see what would happen. And they wanted to see if women could produce offspring with monkeys. And they did basically anything you could be mildly curious about, they did. And the thing was, they didn't even do it well.
Yeah.
They didn't have a sterile environment. People were like when they did the grafts, people were dying from infections, not from rejections. Like a rejection is going to kill a lot of people, but they weren't even doing that. They were just like, hey, let's do this thing in this dirty shed, and if they die, then that was just our fun. They weren't doing it for science whatsoever, even. But
the hydro...
Would that make it better? I don't think so.
The hyperthermia and hypothermia experiments were some of the more conclusive ones they did.
That was the Germans, yeah.
Yeah, and they froze people and saw how long it took them to die, and that's how we know how long it takes someone to die from both of those, and also that's how we know the cures, because they'd get them to the point of near death, and it's like, okay, can we bring them back from here? Or let's push it a little bit further. Can we bring them back from here? Let's push them a little bit further.
And I bet you could see from his point of view, right, that these camps were there to kill people, right?
Yeah.
And what you think then is, these people are going to die. Why not at least help humanity out? And there's a very similar Canadian right now. I don't know his name, but he was talking about how euthanasia has become very popular in Canada. And organ donation is something that we're desperately behind in.
Yeah.
And organs are much easier to save and recover if a person is alive.
Yeah.
So why not make the means of euthanasia organ removal? And this is a doctor in Canada arguing for that.
You know that joke where there's 3 guys and they're on the Amazon River, and they encounter a group of cannibals, and the cannibals take all their gear and they overwhelm them.
Yeah.
And the cannibals tell them, all right, we're going to kill you, and we're going to make you into boats. We're going to like stretcher skin boats. And you can choose how you die. And so the first guy's like, all right, stab me with your spear. Yeah. So he gets stabbed with the spear and he dies. And the second guy's like, all right, here's my gun, shoot me with that gun, it'll be quick. Yeah. And so they shoot him with the gun. And the third guy says, give me a fork. And then he's like, you will not make a boat out of my hide.
Yeah, just starts stabbing himself.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, so you don't want your life to be treated so callously.
Yeah. Jokes often reflect reality. And that's partly what makes them funny.
Yeah. Well, that is what makes them funny, is that they're true.
They're truer than true.
Yeah. Like all stories.
Yeah.
All good stories.
And that's a good joke.
Yeah.
And that's partly from spite as well, but there's also this innate...
Oh, I think it's almost a game theory thing.
Yeah. Yeah, it's game theory, but there's also is an innate, like, you're not going to use me.
Or I'm taking you down with me.
Yeah.
And if the only thing I can do is... Yeah, and it becomes weird, doesn't it? Because you get to the mutually assured destruction, where the best thing to do if, let's say, Russia sent all its nukes at America might be not to fire back.
Yeah.
But maybe it's not. Because the human response is to fire back. And there is a reason for the human response.
It's worked so far.
Yeah. And also it's...
And from all accounts, we've been pretty successful.
Showing yourself to be a pushover even once... I was noticing this. I was watching a bunch of those oversimplified videos.
Yeah.
And what I found really interesting was all these little wars. Like, there's one between the United States... Like, it's right between Vancouver Island and, like, San Francisco. There's this tiny little worthless island.
Yeah.
And the United States and Canada couldn't agree whose island it was. And it seemed more like it was Canada's in a lot of ways. And Canada had an outpost there and they were doing stuff. But the Americans kept encroaching on it and encroaching on it and encroaching on it to the point where war almost broke out.
Yeah.
And the heads of America, heads of Britain and America were like, this is crazy. We can't have a war over this worthless island. We'll just give it to the Americans and we'll call it the end of the day. And the Americans have a lot of stories like this in their history where they don't back down.
Yeah.
They're the obnoxious person that is willing to risk it all for nothing.
Well,
and they keep gaining.
You know Odie and Tinker? How Tinker would be there and go, grr, 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 over her toy. Yeah. And she'd be going. And Odie would just slowly move closer and closer and closer. And eventually he'd push her out of the way. And sometimes she'd snap, but a lot of times she wouldn't. And then he would take her toy and walk away with it.
Yeah. Yeah, if you... the Americans are very successful because of their complete disregard for everyone else and never backing down, even when it would be reasonable.
Yeah. And
so the question is it reasonable to back down at all?
Well, so there's a guy, Lao Y86, I think it's called. He lived in China for years. He was an English teacher in China. And he talks a lot about China. And part of the reason is his wife's from China. He lived in China. He loves China. If he could keep living there, he would. But he can't.
Yeah.
And one of the things is Chinese culture, they're very, very ingrained to them that if you're a pushover once, then we can keep pushing you over. And that's how Chinese diplomats treat Canada.
Well, that's how Canadians are trying... The thing about Now, the one thing about Canada, which is interesting, and I hope this remains true, and I don't know if it will, is we tend to be quite, like the Americans took that island from us. We tend to be quite pushovers.
We'll show our bellies.
Not exactly. It's just we don't want to make a fuss.
Yeah.
It's not that we're afraid. It's that we don't want to make a fuss. At least that's the story we tell ourselves.
Yeah.
But as the truckers showed, which I think is great, is that we don't want to make a fuss until it really matters. And then we go all out. But the problem is, you might have lost so much ground by then that the government can then freeze your bank accounts and do all that. But maybe not. Maybe if this gun ban does pass, then the government will just start being ignored en masse like in Brazil. I really do think we're heading to be more and more like Brazil, where the people just don't care about the government anymore.
Yeah, well,
where the mob has more power than the
that's my thought,
government.
honestly, is if the gun pass, like, a few people will go, okay, yeah, here's this gun that's legal. Another huge crowd of people will go, that's illegal? Man, I didn't know. Yeah. And even more will go, yeah, it's gone.
Yeah, lost it. And it'll be something like in the States with their prohibition, where everyone knows someone that's drinking's got a drink cabinet, whatever. It's just everyone's like, oh yeah, we don't do it. Of course not.
Of course, one of the things about guns being illegal, which is, so alcohol's illegal, and it's like, well, I'm coming to take your alcohol, and you can fight back to defend their point. Someone comes to take the gun that's illegal. You're like, you want to take the thing that lets me fight back. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to fight back right now. And that will be a very
if you
small...
if you feel alone, you're not going to. And everyone feels alone because CBC creates this entirely different narrative that... Like, my friend who was talking about the gun thing, he was talking about how Sweden had this fascist uprising and how the Canadian conservatives are going crazy and they're doing all this anti-COVID stuff and all this... Which is weird because the only people I know that obeyed COVID guidelines in Canada are you and me for a while.
Yeah.
And maybe not even you.
I got fed up after a certain point.
And the guidelines were, and my friend included, did not follow them.
Yeah.
And yet he's saying that the conservatives in Alberta who were against the mandates are the crazy ones. And it's like, but you don't even believe that with your principles. It's just what the general consensus has been to say.
Yeah.
And the thing is, I have a lot of friends like this where I know at their core they're very good people, but it's tricky because well, first of all, I can't talk so much because of my voice, right? Yeah. But that's a small thing. The harder, even if I had my voice full, I don't know if I could do it because you cannot launch into a 2-hour explanation of the immense corruption and gaslighting that is going on in the world with the communist takeover without sounding like a crazy person.
From my perspective, the Jedi are the evil ones.
Yeah, you say that, you sound evil.
Yeah.
And
then you take a step back and look at the Jedi Order, and they're kind of awful.
And the problem is, as well, that it's so complicated. I don't have enough information.
Yeah.
Because the problem is, I can give you a dozen little examples, but they will always have an excuse. And fair enough, they have an excuse. Yeah. But the thing is, the examples are just trying to point at the much larger problem. It doesn't matter. But that's exactly what a insane person would say about a conspiracy theory. It doesn't matter about the facts. It's about what's behind it all.
And where it comes to is...
So you have to be very precise in your language.
Yes. And you also have to be a solid person.
Yeah, definitely. You have to be someone that they actually listen to when you go crazy.
Yeah.
And they say, well, this guy's not normally crazy. Something's going on here. But you have to be so precise because you cannot convince anyone of anything. You have to let them come to the conclusion on their own. And
I don't like being called no one.
Well, I mean, you're better than most, but even then, I don't know if you've noticed this pattern. Maybe I shouldn't say it because it's been working in my favor massively. But I'll say something, right? And you'll totally disagree with it. And then 4 episodes later, you'll state it as if it's your own position. So...
Yes, I'm just
that you came up with independently. No, it's not that you're a sheep. It's that you've had time to digest and come to the conclusion on your own.
Yes,
and realize that I'm amazing and wise and. But if you're very precise and you think things through, people will think that about your thoughts. They'll say, "Wait, I can't actually deny this guy's thought. It has a point. But it's very hard to do, and it's very hard to... You don't want to just say, hey man, how's it going? You want to catch up on a game of basketball? Yeah, sure. By the way, the communists are trying to take over the country, and Trudeau's a tyrant, and he's trying to... Like, that's... You're the crazy one at that point.
Yes.
Because what was his name? The Czechoslovakian guy. The way that you, in the end, combat all the problems, all the ills of the world is you live the way you want to.
Yeah.
And you make that life something that other people want to emulate.
Yes.
And so people say, I'm suffering and I'm losing my guns and I'm losing my rights and everyone's calling me racist. And you say, come, my child. Well, here's a better way. Except you don't even do that. You let them look at you.
Well, I explained something very interesting about the Chinese protests. And one of the things is there's a mass amount of support outside of China. And what I explained was kind of this interesting story is, so you have someone who lives in China, or they live outside of China, and they really don't like the Chinese government. And they hate it, they want to talk about it, but it's like, everyone every single day talks about how much they love the Chinese government, because that's part of its protocols, like you espouse your love for the Chinese government. And speaking out against it can get you in trouble. And so you feel like you're alone.
Yeah.
In your dislike of the Chinese Communist Party.
But it turns out everyone's the same.
And now these protests are actually happening in the heart of China. And so these people that left China are now finding each other like, yeah, no, we support people in China. And people in China are going, whoa.
Everyone's with me.
Yeah.
Yeah. The other thing that you have to do, unless you're in a situation like China where you have to be very careful.
Yeah.
But what we can do here, when you're combating, let's say, combating in quotation marks, the progressives, the SJWs, whatnot, you don't have to ever launch into how much you hate this or how virtuous you are, how the right wing's the only way, something like that. But never concede ground.
Yeah.
You don't have to take ground, but never concede ground. So someone says, like, man, those guys... Even if someone says, man, those guys are racist, let's say. Yeah. You don't necessarily have to chew them out for it.
Yeah.
But if they say, don't you think they're racist? Never say yes.
Mm-hmm.
Always stand by your convictions.
Yeah. Always da-da-da, da-da-da-da.
Never back down. Yeah, it's actually I had this quote here for a totally different reason, but it's weirdly applicable. It's Sadhguru. He says, idiots do things that they don't like to do, suffer their whole lives because they think it's needed or they think it's their duty.
Yeah.
Intelligent people do what they love to do, and it's don't be an idiot. Don't do something just because that's what you think everyone wants you from you. I talked about my experience at at Thanksgiving, right, where everyone was like, man, these pronouns are crazy. And I was like, wait, all right, that's the other aspect. The internet isn't real.
Yes.
Absolutely isn't real. It's becoming more and more real. You've got people, I think Hillary Clinton really started it where she talked about Pepe and trolls and whatnot.
Yeah.
But most sane people, the internet isn't real. Or all sane people, maybe.
It's a different form of civilian.
It is crazy though that like they call them normies.
Yeah.
The internet people call them normies. But it's the same idea. And that is something that's actually a great example because the normies are the admirable ones.
Yes.
They're the people living their lives and being healthy and sane and normal. Whereas the internet people, the woke ones, left or right,
yeah,
the people that are aware of the political struggle going on, are the ones suffering for nothing because if they vanish tomorrow, everything would keep ticking along. But the problem is that people keep trying to bring it into reality through legislative means. So it does get complicated because you have, like the local church here brings in identity politics and whatnot. And I talked a bunch of episodes ago how they're casually racist, and I couldn't think of an example. And I thought of one where you hear this sort of thing all the time, just casually from... You're talking to this really nice person and you're having this time, or you're at the church and they're talking about how we should all be loving and caring. And then they bring out something like, it's because there's too many old white men control everything. They sound like crazy anti-Semitic people.
Yeah.
Especially since a lot of the powerful old white men are Jews.
Yeah, they managed to live quite a while.
And a lot of Jews are white. And a lot of the ones that are in the positions of power are men. But it doesn't matter what they are. It's the fact that it's the same thing where I have this friend. She's the most lovely person on earth. And many years ago, she was driving me home and we were talking about something. It's like, yeah, it's just, I hate old white men. And I was like, hey, I plan to be an old white man someday.
I think one of the things that I've thought about a lot, you know those, you don't have to return the time?
Well, I wish I had said it. I didn't say it to her then. That it's yeah.
Yeah, but the
spirit of the stairs.
Yeah, the spirit of the stairs. But it's the spirit of the stairs that will come around again. And the one thought that I have for that is, what does that have to do with anything?
Well, I think just, hey, I plan to be an old white man.
Yeah, there's also...
Because she's my friend.
Yeah.
I'm not going to go aggressive on her.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to say, no, I disagree.
Yes.
So I have another friend. She's a much less lovely person. But she was talking about how if you don't stand up against racists and bigots and this sort of thing, you're as responsible as they are. And I said to her, if someone's drowning in a river, you jump in the river, you could drown as well. And you're a hero if you save them, but you're not at fault if you don't.
Yeah.
And she said, yeah, I guess you're right. And then everybody clapped. No, but that is a true story. That did happen, except for the clapping.
Yeah. It's dangerous to clap while driving.
She just hadn't thought about it. And so, I don't think I was aggressive there, but you can actually... Lecturing people is very hit or miss. Yes. I would recommend against it in like 99% of cases, or maybe 100% of cases.
Yeah.
The thing is, I lecture her about how she eats. Like, I don't know. Do you think sometimes it's like, oh, we have fun, or is that a really bad relationship? I have to ask her sometime.
Well, so there's an interest. I have a friend when we talk, and I just basically talk about a lot of things I've learned and those things, and so it could be said as lecturing. And they said something that I found really sweet the last time we talked, which is, I really enjoy talking to you. I always learn something new, and I like learning new things.
It's how you'd go about it too, right? Yeah. You don't talk down to them as if you talk to them, you're exploring an idea, right?
Yeah.
You don't just tell them things, you talk about things.
Yes.
Because you're learning too. And the moment it becomes a teacher-student relationship, they're not your friend.
Yeah.
But if you're talking about things and saying, hey, this is... And then they say, well, actually, I think it's like this. You're like, okay, Like when my friend says that fascists are rising in Sweden, right? That one friend. I don't say to him, no, they're not, you're crazy. Because he's the guy that has visited Sweden many times. He knows a lot more about Sweden than I do. I can't just dismiss him out of hand. He may be wrong, but he might not be. Like, wasn't the Sons of Odin like a big thing for a while? Like, they had all those... they had a ridiculous amount of refugees come in. And then they had that massive counter movement against them where people were like that massive backlash. Yeah. I think they were called the Sons of Odin. They were like these nationalists that just wanted to kick out all immigrants. And I believe the Sons of Odin were actually, maybe it was a different group, but the Sons of Odin, they got a lot of bad press because they were nationalists, but they weren't Nazis. They were just nationalists. And of course the media gets those mixed up all the time.
Yes.
So what I said to my friend was...
You need the socialism attached to the nationalism.
So what I said to my friend about the whole conservative thing, because I didn't know what he was talking about with the conservatives either. And with the other thing is I said, the only place you can hear stuff is from the news, and who knows what they want. Like, so I don't know. So I just said I'm not willing to take a stance there. And, so I didn't agree with him, but I didn't disagree with him because maybe he knows something I don't know. That's important to keep in mind as well.
My one thought, and it is the political divide that exists of one side wanting one thing and one side wanting another, but somehow it's come to a point of they must stand diametrically opposed on all said.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy, isn't it?
But and it might have been since democracy immemorial, but when did it become the case that the opposite political leaning of you is wrong, evil, fascist, communist about all their endeavors?
Well, QED indubitably...
I am sorry. Sorry for trying to speak by accent with pomp.
Ipso facto supererogatory.
I was trying to come up with the right words to say it.
Ad proc hoctor.
Could you answer?
I believe I did, my dear boy. I think
you were just saying superfluous words.
My loquaciousness was a necessity given the dire straits, the
circumstances.
The circumstances we find ourselves in, the extreme measures we must take
to be provided.
Precise in our speech, and the locution of our enunciation is of utmost importance in this endeavor. Supererogatory. I think that it's political and not real. So it's much easier to win an election if you can rally people against your enemy. But people that vote opposite are normal.
Yeah.
But
it's when I hear
when
I hear people talk about conservatives, the conservatives to them are alt-right. There are no conservatives. They're all alt-right.
Well, we're in a pretty, I don't know how, but we're in a crazy left bubble. Like, I'm not really sure why or how. I guess because they all cling together. But it's weird that it's like all our family.
Well, and our friends. Look, I figured it out, right? So we were raised with these ideals of equality and respect and these things.
Yeah.
And we both went through Miss Allen's class.
Yeah.
Our teacher.
Yeah.
And the class, a lot of her lessons were about these things. And we went through the teacher after his class as well.
Yeah.
And he had ideas slightly different, but still he talked about ideas of like what's right, what's wrong in the world.
Yeah.
And our upbringing with our dad.
Actually, I want that the teacher we had after. He said something that is really interesting because he was wrong and he shouldn't have been wrong. He said that if you're a terrible person, you'll have no friends. And one day, he said, if you're a terrible person, one day you'll wake up and you realize you have no friends, and then you'll need to change.
Yeah.
And he was wrong, because what happens if you're a terrible person is instead nobody wants to hurt your feelings, and so you keep being a terrible person, and all of society suffers.
Yeah.
If you live in a healthy society, you end up with no friends.
Yeah, and so our dad read to us a lot of books about philosophy to different extents.
Yeah, well, more like hocus pocus spiritualism.
I'm talking about Orson Scott Card.
Okay, sure, yeah.
Like Cruel Miracles and those books. And we also both of us read a lot of literature. So Harry Potter and a bunch of other stories about what's right and wrong. And Lord of the Rings has what's right and wrong in it. And then I think both of us around the point of high school got to the point where so we had these views of...
What happened to your sesquipedalian locature, sir? Sesquipedalian locature.
It happens from time to time. It's not on purpose. It actually, that's just the way I speak.
Sorry, Lord of the Rings.
Yes.
And we learned all these lessons.
Yeah. So we get to high school.
Yeah.
And around the point of time, so I'm about like first year, second year of high school.
Yeah.
And you're going on to university, I guess. Is probably around the time it happens.
And these fat hags come into my classroom and say Disney is sexist.
Well...
And we laughed them out of the class as a class.
Okay.
So it hadn't quite crept in then.
But we are told, because we're both white men...
Yes.
And that we are evil for reasons beyond our own control.
Yeah.
And we've grown up with the teachings that if it's reasons beyond your own control... And the original sin is unfair.
Yeah.
And this is wrong. And so when we are told, when we have a moral compass that is the actual ideal of the left, not what they're doing now, but it's the sort of thing that led to it. We have that moral compass. And then we are told, and we view things as wrong because there is unfairness. Like, oh, only girls can go to this thing.
Yeah.
And it's... No, girls and guys are equal.
Yeah.
That is our view. And so when all that happens, then we look for, well, what on earth? Am I insane?
But why does the bubble exist at all? Like,
well, I think
why aren't half of our friends right wing and half of our friends left wing? That sort of thing.
I think
or half of our parental figures right wing, half our parental figures left wing.
Well, I think our dad's actually an actual liberal.
Maybe. I don't know. That's the thing though, right? There's a lot of people that have a core guiding principle that is decent, right? But their overlying one is much more in line with the progressive marching orders.
Well, I think Sargon makes this joke about everyone in his office. Not him so much, but all his employees. Which is they're all slightly autistic. And like you said, so we have these principles, and yes, so we exist in that bubble, but also we're both not antisocial, but content with ourselves.
I mean, I'm a pretty social person.
But you can also, well, maybe it's different for me. Okay, I won't lump you with me. I am content with myself.
Meaning,
like the cat who the story of the cat who walks alone.
I think everyone likes having people around to some extent.
Yes, I like having people, but also I don't need them. And
maybe
I mean I don't need them always.
Yeah,
that's to be more fair. And spend a lot of time on the internet, and so when you try to look at the dichotomy of this, what would be a non-fanciful word for dichotomy?
Dichotomy's fine.
This duality?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. Duality. Of, well, I believe in equality and I believe in fairness and these things. But people who espouse that that's what they're doing, they aren't, then I'm going to look for that. And by looking for it, it is changed. Because maybe our friends and stuff aren't people who are going to look for that as much. I don't know.
I'm not sure what question you've answered there. Because my question is not why are we different? It's why why are they all leftists in the first place?
Well, maybe it's because they don't look, and it was
right. But why isn't it that half of our relations don't look and half of them do, or something like that? Why is it that everyone is in goose step, lockstep, even?
Well,
and obviously a lot of them aren't like. Now here's the thing as well. Actually, just on that point, nobody is a caricature. They're all individuals.
Yes.
And so, for example, my friend who I talked about saving the drowning person, she is, you can call her like a left-wing activist.
Yeah.
She's worked for political parties. She does a lot of stuff on social media. She's quite the community figure.
Mm-hmm. And
she goes to all these events and she's a leader at all these events. She gets all sorts of awards and goes around the world talking about social justice issues, that sort of thing. And when I went to her birthday party, she was talking to me about how, which is kind of funny because we barely ever talk politics, and I'm not right wing, but she was saying, this friend of mine's going to be there. You'll like him. He's head of the youth right wing party. And so she is basically as activist as you can be, while still being mildly sane. And she's got friends all over the political spectrum. Yeah. And she knows they're all over the political spectrum. Mm-hmm. And she'll even talk to them about politics. And now she is of a decent amount of character. Like that is actually, not everyone can pull that off. But a lot of, I guess a decent amount of my friends are conservative. It's just they don't talk about it. And the ones, this is it, right? Okay, this is going to sound very mean in a way. I think leftists virtue signal and right-wing people don't. So you don't know that half your friends are right-wing.
Yeah.
But you do know that half are left-wing, and so you assume everyone is. That's my little temporary theory there. Because thinking about it, I have a lot of centrist or conservative type friends. It's just they don't talk about it, and they don't. It's just they go along with their lives. But then there's the people like, oh, this is racist, this is sexist. You got to point it all out.
People I interact with, to a majority, which is through online.
Are online.
They're online, but they're also all recently out of university or in university within an echo chamber.
Right, okay. That's a good point, that we are, what do you call that?
Middle class?
Yeah. I was going to say like upper middle class, something like that. So all of our friends went to university.
Yeah.
So they've all been through the brain scrubber.
Or are currently in it.
Yeah. And yeah, like my best friend, he was saying some stuff and I was like, you don't believe this? What?
Well, what really confused me is he's been on here, so not to call him out too much, but wrong me.
We're not going to mention any names.
Starts
with R, rhymes with Solamni.
Is he made fun of me for going to the Social Justice Club at school. Because at that point in time, it was an internet thing, to a certain extent, to make fun of SJWs.
Yeah. Well, was it back then? Oh, I guess back when you were... Yeah, maybe not when I was there.
Yeah.
The Social Justice Club at our school was not social justice warriors, though.
Yeah.
They did stuff like, give homeless people food.
Yeah.
They were actually like a charity that did stuff.
Mm-hmm.
It was actually pretty awesome.
Yeah. And like we would joke about these things. Like we'd joke about pronoun things like Apache attack helicopter. Like, the one joke that the right has. Like,
yeah,
that was funny. We were in grade 9. It was a good joke.
Jeez. We weren't talking about anything like that when I was in grade 9.
Yeah, and...
It really started taking off, I guess.
Yeah. And so we were very much...
I guess there's all those people with those Apache attack helicopter pronouns.
Yeah. Well, it was very much... To a point, like, through a lot of high school even, I thought a lot of my friends had very similar politics to me, including Romney. And one friend always had disagreements. Is another one of my good friends. And, like, we'd have some disagreements, like, okay, whatever.
I will say for Romney, he's... I don't know his crazy leftist beliefs. I'm sure he's got a bunch. But, and if you're listening to Romney, good. But you got the solid core. And that's all that matters at the end of the day. We could be wrong. You could be totally right. You've got a solid core. Yeah. And that's all that really matters.
But it's not like he is by far the most non-committal to it. I will say that. Like,
and I've also...
Out of everyone who I talk to online in the server, he is the least political of it.
I've debated stuff with him, not on the podcast, and he's been totally willing to change his mind.
Yes. Yeah. And it's like with him, I think more to a point is the beliefs and like, oh, stupid thing I heard about. Whatever. Yeah. But some of the other people, like the one that really got to me, and this is a guy I've never met in person. I want to meet him in person. He's a pretty decent guy. Like, he can get angry, but then he'll go, I'm sorry for getting angry at you. It's like, in the moment, I'm trying to work on that. But he was playing Guilty Gear. And I was talking to him about Brigitte. Yeah. Or Bridget.
Bridget.
Yeah, Bridget. And I was basically talking about I was like sending messages because I know he likes Guilty Gear. And I was sending him the sort of meme things about the trap and how Brigitte is a guy. And then he corrected me, no, it's she. It's a girl. And it's like, wait, what? And it's furthermore like certain points like, oh, okay, he is very much actually, like not super in lockstep, but he's very much of, oh, this thing's bad, this is the way this thing is.
Yeah, this is the right way to look at it.
And
also, I think in-game, Bridget's now a girl possibly as well.
No, in the English translation.
Yeah, so if that's the first game he started with, then
yeah,
he's not going to know otherwise.
But the Japanese writers are angry about the English translation.
Yeah, I don't know the situation.
Yeah, but
I'll say some people just want to grill. So your friend could just be, I just want to play this fun game without hearing about your stupid politics.
Yeah.
I don't know the situation, but that is a possibility.
Even if...
Because if someone sends me, hey, that thing you like, why is it this way? I'd be like, shut up.
Even if canonically you go with that, what is the translation, but you go by the basis of the story established till that point, Brigitte has been gaslit.
Bridget.
Yeah, Bridget's been gaslit into being a girl.
Yeah.
And it's horrible.
So it's not like Poison? Like Poison in Street Fighter is just straight up biologically female in America.
No, it's not like that. It's that...
So they're trans?
Yeah.
Okay. With the same background story?
Yes.
Yeah, that's a bit messed up.
Yeah.
But you could have in theory, if you went along with transgender being a thing in the first place, you could be trans and be gaslit into being trans at the same time, overcome one and allow you to fully accept your identity as the other. Like, for example, me, right? If someone was trying to gaslight me into that, into something I wanted to do, I might not do it just because they wanted me to do it. But once I was able to stop caring about what they think, I would go and do the thing they wanted me to do in the first place.
Yeah, there is that, definitely.
But no, I do know that the story there, it's pretty nasty. But depending on how you approached your friend, if I'm enjoying something and someone says, hey, that thing you like, you shouldn't like it because of this, I'd be like, shut up.
I was just making a joke, and then when he said that correction to my joke, I just said, okay, and left it there. Because I didn't want to get into it, though.
Yeah, and just don't background. Yeah. Like, if he says, you got to believe this, you're like, no. But if the two of you just don't want to talk about it, yeah.
Yeah.
And I don't want to just be criticizing you, right, and saying everything you do is wrong. I just don't know the situation. And I guess what I could do is give you the benefit of the doubt, but...
Your older brother.
Yeah. So, I mean... Plus, you know that saying, like, what do you have against the French? Mm-hmm. Evidence.
Yes. However, there's also of when you do not give someone the benefit of the doubt, something like you do, you push me on these matters, and
you have to defend your position.
I defend my position and think about it, but also it's like no, it can either confirm it or it can point me to the point of where I am.
But what annoys me, although maybe it's good for me all the same, is I'll talk to our mom about something like Maid, and I'll say, assisted suicide is the 6th highest cause of death in Canada.
Yeah.
And there's like 10,000, depending on measurement methods, there's 10,000 to 30,000 deaths, something like that, in a year. And she'll say, no, that's ridiculous. You must be remembering it wrong, or it must be based on how you measure it. And so I go, okay. Maybe I'm remembering it wrong, but that does sound crazy. So then I go away, and I read the Canadian government's own report that says there was 10,032 deaths in 2021. Yeah. And then I bring the report to our mom, and I say, okay, this is the Canadian government itself saying this is how many deaths they recorded. And then it's 10,000. So on the one hand, I'm annoyed that she's not just believing me. But on the other hand, it does force me to actually, come up with proof. So you're just thinking sweet justice, aren't you?
No, I'm just thinking, you tell mom something. That's nice, dear.
Mom, the government's killing people. That's nice, dear. I do feel bad that, I don't talk much at all, right? I basically only talk on this podcast. And then I saw a friend, 2 days ago, and I talked to him. But that's, I talk, maybe twice a week, really. Yeah. And the thing is that I'm still reading and doing all this stuff. And so when I do talk, I want to talk about the thing that's, blowing my mind because it's so crazy. So it's all I talk about is negative, crazy politics with our mom. It's I know I want to talk about different stuff. I know I'm doing it, and I'm just but the government's killing people.
No. They're walking into the lion's den.
Yeah, well, ooh. Then you shouldn't have government if that's the way you think. If it's in the government's nature to kill its citizens, then you do not want government.
I mean, the people are asking the government to kill them, but
right. But the thing was that both parties were responsible in that example, right?
Yeah.
So if it's in the government's nature to kill,
well, it saves on health costs for healthcare system.
Barely,
Well, also if we go through the organ harvesting thing, that also helps.
Yeah, well, that'll help a lot. Yeah. But who at that point keep people alive in that system?
So I take it you saw Benjamin talking to that Indian guy?
Nope. Benjamin Boyce?
Yeah.
No, I don't think so.
He's talking about Maid and its impact on immigrants to Canada, and also workers and travelers, and on that level, it's more messed up actually, and that might be the angle to approach it from to get people's attention. But also just him talking about immigration in general in Canada and the system we have set up, and immigration through a lot of the world and the way we're treating it. It is
give an example of what's Maid have to do with immigration.
Well, before I get into that, just him talking about immigration in general and what we're doing. It is not good.
How so?
So there's the brain drain has been around forever of countries. And I already don't like brain drain. Taking their experts from them, and they're smart people.
Then they should have had a better country. I don't know.
Well, those people can make the country better.
Not if they're here.
Yeah. But the other one is we have...
What are you going to do? Turn down the...
Because we want... Well, one, we take a lot of immigrants. All countries that are taking immigrants take a lot of immigrants. And we no longer have integration policies towards it. So we don't try to promote learning the language. They can keep speaking their own language. And
really? I thought you had to learn English to...
Not anymore.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
And so they only can speak their own language. And so instead of having one family, this, let's go with German family moves in. And they speak a little bit of English, they learn a bit better, and they integrate with their people around them. And they share their culture into it. Because that's one of the big things is, you don't want to share the culture into it. It's not... The immigrants aren't even sharing their culture anymore. Because...
They're just keeping their own culture separate.
Enclaves are being created. And so that's one part is there's enclaves. But another is there are so many people coming that they are competing for each other's jobs. And one of the big things in India is, so a family wants a better life for their son. And so they have a bit of land. And they're struggling, but okay, our son can do better. And so they sell their land, and they've been told... In Canada, it's a good place. It's there's good money, it's good jobs, it's a first world country, and you can become a student there. And so this guy's family sells their plot of land, they go into debt. They send him to Canada to become a student, and he doesn't speak English. And so he's trying to go through a school, and he doesn't want the shame of going back to his family saying it failed, so he can't go out. So there's a large unreported amount of them that just commit suicide because they don't want to deal with that shame. And the family never knows. Their son just disappears. And others drop out and they have to start working jobs, but they can only get the lowest end jobs because that's the spaces that they occupy. And so they compete with each other for those jobs. And then after a certain while, a few people will be able to come back and basically tell us culture, like, we have to stop going to Canada because we're going to debt. These young people have horrible lives there. And so the center of the city, basically like the city that actually speaks English, is like, okay, no longer that. And then the next ring out that speaks a slightly different dialect of Hindi goes into Canada. And now they're competing for even more jobs. Then there's a lack of jobs and housing is very hard to get in Canada, so they can't get good housing. And so they go back again. And then even further loop goes out that they don't even speak Hindi because there's like 80 different dialects of Hindi, but you can translate them from one to the other. But these guys don't even speak Hindi. And so the people who want to help them, like this one guy who he's an advocate for immigrants, he can't even communicate with these people because he doesn't speak their language. No one does. They're like, their community is the only people in the world. And so that's happening. And then once this has happened to India, we go to another country and start grabbing them. And all this is to feed, it's the same with the NHS, the health system. A part of this whole thing is feeding more people into the system so you can tax them. So it's this machine that's eating its own tail of, well, we need more people to pay for it. And then we get their taxes, we get some money from them, but it's less and less each time. But it's a nice influx of cash for a country. Immigrants do bring in money, but it is not permanent. And if you bring too many, it's less and less every single time. And eventually, it's a bubble that bursts. So this is what this one guy was saying.
Yeah.
And
very socialist argument.
Yeah.
Which is kind of weird that for some reason the left and the right have totally opposite views on border control. When the left should be totally for border control and the right should be for open borders.
Yeah.
But,
yeah. And so his thing on the Maid program is if you're an immigrant, a work immigrant, a student immigrant, whatever, and you come in, or even you're a refugee, this is less to extent though, you're not covered by our healthcare. You can't get our healthcare.
Right.
And we do not have private practice. That one guy up here who like froze himself and actually like managed to pay in our hospital is really weird because we just don't let you in Canada. Like it's very rare that we actually let foreigners even use it and pay the overcharged price. But a lot of these immigrant workers who are like just here for a season wouldn't have enough money anyways to pay for that in the first place. So
we don't have public healthcare either, though, right? Like, we have private practitioners that are only paid by the government.
Yes, and we are not allowed to have private practitioners not paid by them.
Right.
And people really want that to happen, but we have this weird loophole in our Bill of Rights that stops it.
In France, you can be private or public, which I think France has the best in the world, personally. Yeah. Like, it sounds like a great system. I'd have to talk to a French person, but that would require talking.
Anyways, so these people...
I'm sorry, France.
And like these students, they can't get the healthcare. And so they're not covered by that healthcare. They can't go to a private practitioner. And they can't really get back to country, especially if you like suffer some sort of injury while you're up here, right? They do have access to Maid.
Really?
Yes.
That's weird.
And so, let's say an immigrant worker comes up here to harvest fruit, which happens in British Columbia a lot.
Breaks his leg.
Yeah.
Falls off a tree, breaks his leg. The doctors start circling like vultures.
Well, if he goes to healthcare, it's like, well, we can't do anything for you, but we can kill you.
That's very weird.
And, well, if you can't work with a broken leg, and he doesn't want to deal with the shame of the broken leg for his family.
Is that a potential, or has it happened?
It's happened. And also, another thing is with the depressed people, so they can't access, because we actually do have access to help with professionals, even through the medical system of depression. But these people have the shame, like, oh, I'm not making as much as I can't send it back to the family. And so the student can't get any help and he can't go back home. But he can go to Maid.
The mental health thing isn't until next year, though, right? I think? Or is that for wider?
That's for wider. But the one thing about the immigrants is like the only access they have in Canada, because they can't go to a private practitioner. They're not allowed, but they have access to Maid.
Why? That's really weird.
That's what the guy wanted to know when he's talking. And Benjamin was kind of like, I'm laughing about it because it's the only thing I can do. It's so absurd.
So my voice is going, but that I want to talk about something that you brought up then. Because that reminds me of something in the States which, like, the fact that we don't give healthcare to them, but we give Maid is crazy. So in this, and this is just, it seems parallel to this thing in the States, to do with abortion.
Yeah.
So I'll go into that for a little bit, and then we can wrap it up. Does that work for you?
Yep.
So the agreement was legal, safe, and rare, right, about abortion.
Yeah.
And I always thought that makes sense to me, to more or less. And it was interesting in school, we'd have abortion debates in class, in like classes where we did debates.
Mm-hmm.
And we would do abortion in my philosophy class as a debate. And you could also...
Good thing you added as a debate after that. That's a weird place to be doing that.
It was also something I debated with friends,
yeah.
was abortion. Because it's an interesting debate that there isn't a clear answer to. Except since I've been in school, it appears that there are now clear answers to it. Because people are now taking very specific sides. Yeah. Whereas when I was in school, it was just something that was interesting to debate because you could clearly see the positives and the negatives to it. And you could have a discussion about it. But now there's a right side and a wrong side depending on which side you're on.
Yeah.
Which is a shame. But I think it's a lot harder to argue for abortion once you look at the actual numbers of abortion. So for every 5 births in America, so every 5 babies born, 1 is aborted.
So is this pregnancies?
Births. So every time 5 kids are born, 1 kid is aborted.
Oh, okay.
So 1 in 6 kids is aborted, basically.
Yeah.
Except the math is that 20% of kids are aborted, which makes no sense with the other statistic. So someone's bad at math or someone's bad at reporting. Unless an abortion counts as a birth, which it could potentially, I guess. I don't... But the numbers are still roughly about 20%.
Yeah.
So the thing about that is that 20% is an average. Black families abort about 40 to 44% of their kids, whereas Asians abort like 10%.
Yeah.
And white people tend to actually abort around the 20% mark. And apparently the person that started, what's it called? Is it Planned Parenthood or the other thing?
Planned Parenthood is the abortion. It's ironic.
Didn't like black people. Now, I don't know how true this is. But there's rumors that she started this whole thing as a way to get rid of black people. And I don't know if that's true or not, but but it does appear to be working whether or not that was her intent. Because they're aborting at twice the rate of other groups.
Yeah.
And so you see...
Well, do they experience twice the amount of pregnancies? Because that's another statistic to throw into there.
I don't think that would matter because you're doing abortions per birth. So they're aborting 40... So even if they're having more pregnancies... Yeah. Now, what you could say is that they can't afford that many kids and they're having way more kids. So there is a lot of reasons why they might be getting more abortions. Black people in America tend to be poor. So you might be less able to have kids. They tend to have single parents a lot more often. And single parents are less able to take care of kids. So that's another reason. Yeah. So there's a lot of wealth-related reasons why that would be the case. Mm-hmm. So maybe I can't make that connection. I can say that it's ridiculously high. Mm-hmm. But it does seem to parallel the Maid thing where for some reason, and maybe this isn't true. Maybe it's just, there's a lot of statistical anomalies. Yeah. So I don't know. I'll say it because it's obvious, but I'm now second guessing myself. It almost seems to be targeting minorities in the same, like the Maid thing, and is this specially designed to get rid of?
The Maid is targeting vulnerable people. That's the bigger thing.
Well, that's the same with the abortion, right? It's forget black people, and Asians are the richest people in America. They're getting the least abortions. The abortion laws are causing the most abortions to happen to poor people.
Yeah, if you look at it across the statistical line of wealth, then you would probably find that as poor people.
Yeah. And Maid is the same because people who can't afford to have a housekeeper or who their family can't afford to take care of them, they're the ones that don't want to be burdens.
Well, there's that one guy who he realized that he was going to become homeless. And he didn't want to be homeless. He'd rather die. And so he signed up for Maid. Or
there's that other guy that said, my degenerative disease isn't getting better like I hoped it would. And he was in his 30s. Like, he's still around. But he was saying, because he was still quite young. He got this horrible degenerative disease, and he was feeling really rough. And then he's in the hospital, and he says, I need to move to a long-term care home because I'm not going to get better. Yeah. He said, can you pay for a long-term care home? And they said, no, you have to leave the hospital, and if you don't, we'll stop giving you water. Yeah. And this guy's still alive, and he's fighting them now, which good for him. But it's just like, he's already dealing with, he's like in his 30s, and he's thinking he's never going to be able to get out of bed again, basically. And instead of having to come to terms with that, instead he's busy fighting the government for just a place to stay because they want to starve him to death instead.
Well, the thing that's affected me the most is the story about the guy's brother said, you'll have to get me out.
Yeah, so there's a guy that was suicidal. Yeah. And so he got checked into a hospital. And he was in there for a while, and then he sent a message to his brother. He's like, you got to bust me out of here. And then his brother, a month later, went to check on him, and he was dead because he had signed for Maid because he was suicidal. He was put on suicide watch, and they said, hey, while you're on suicide watch, you want to kill yourself?
Yeah. And, that story, as a brother, and I feel like a lot of brothers actually feel this to a certain extent, has the potential of hospitals being attacked.
Yeah, no, that was...
Because for me, like, I was thinking about it. If you were put into a hospital for a reason, and, like, depression was a part of it, I would rather take care of you than let the hospital, even with what's going on right now. And if they refuse to give you to me, because they do that sometimes, like, it might accidentally create a domestic terrorist.
Mm-hmm.
Because I would be willing to fight to get people I love.
Yeah, no, it's kind of crazy. That story really hit me hard too. Yeah, yeah. I feel like what's going on with the abortion thing.
Mom told me, don't ever consider putting me in a hospital for something like that and sign me up for those things. Like, she even said that.
Well, I was thinking about, like, with the abortion and this Maid thing, I think what's going on is there's just some...
death cult.
No, I think there's just paperwork being shuffled around by people not thinking about it. And...
What was the term? Bean counters?
Yeah, same with, like, the abortion thing, right? I don't think... Maybe... Okay, here's the thing, though. I think
it's twofold, because there...
Have you seen the giant owl that takes child sacrifices that all the rich presidents go to and sacrifice a screaming child to?
No.
There is a death cult in the States that worships a giant owl that kills children. And, like, George Bush was part of it, and, like, all these rich and famous people. So I want to say that this is not intentional. But then there's death cults that sacrifice children to Moloch, and they're real. I'm not making it
I was
up.
talking about a slightly different death cult, which is the suicide cafes.
Right,
and those people who, like, there's...
No, what I'm saying is that there are worshippers of a demon who want to kill as many people as possible to please his thirst.
Okay, and what I was talking about...
And it's I'm not... I know why Alex Jones ended up the way he did, because he... Mm-hmm. I will show you the video. Yeah. I will show you the video.
Well, the thing I'm talking about is it's a death cult of people's selves of... Like, there's different forms of this death cult in the Rebellion Extinction.
Yeah.
But there's also just depressed people falling to a death cult. There's
voluntary suicide.
Yeah, there's a... Maybe suicide cult's better?
Voluntary extinction group, yeah.
Yeah, it really reflects the fairies from the Dragonbone chair of they've given up on life because they were at the height of their civilization and it was brought down about them, and so they fled and lived. But they no longer thrive, and even though they're immortals and they have everything they could ever want, all they want is to die, and they're obsessed with their own death.
But who are the people enabling them? Instead of convincing them otherwise. Like, those are the people that I'm...
Yeah, well, thankfully the fairies don't have enablers in the story, and so they've just been dwelling in a shadow of existence.
Like, you know that charity, the voluntary extinction group or whatever, where you die, you transfer your inheritance to them? Yeah. It's like, Now, if their leaders were killing themselves, like, if to be the CEO, like, here's the only way I'd be okay with that, right? The treasurer, the CEO, whoever's in charge of the company, serves for 6 months, and then they have to kill themselves. That's the only way because it just sounds like they've found a way to scam people into killing themselves and giving them their money.
There's a charity recently, I've been thinking about charities a lot lately because I donated to one. There's a charity that's been around for ages, and they said, we are going to spend all our money on this one cause that we believe in, and we're going to destroy our charity, basically, by doing so. And part of his reason, like, we have to take action, we could just, like, be this organization that exists and does this over time, or we could act now and do it when it really matters and really counts. So he's more thinking altruistic, like, we have to do it now. And my thought on it is, I think charities almost in a way should implode themselves, so they don't have the chance for, like, corruption, money laundering to run through them, because, like, the longer they exist, the more likely that has to happen to them.
Yeah. Yes. Renew Eternal. Like the Phoenix.
Yeah.
Or the hero. Yeah, no, that's a good idea.
Because, like, it's what I was saying about unions earlier. Like, there's a communist subversion of the unions, but also when you talk to anyone about actor unions that they're in, and unions in general, they exist to keep themselves existing.
Yeah, well, and so why join the union? And so there's a way I play board games that no one else seems to play board games this way, and I don't know why. But how I play board games is if there is only one way to win, no matter how crazy or counterintuitive it is, I will take that path.
You freaking rabbit token taker.
So even if the sensible seeming play is to be cautious or to play properly.
Just eat your lettuces normally like the rest of us.
I will do something like to give an imaginary example, I will throw a grenade at a guy that has a 99% chance of killing him, just on the off chance he survives with a 1% chance to be launched across the map to get into a position to do what I need to do. If that's the only way I can win. Whereas most people, even if they will lose the game, they won't take the 1% chance.
Yeah.
So what Hitler said about the unions was that the workers were taking the only path available to them for victory.
Yeah.
They had already gone to the government, and the government had done nothing. And Hitler said that was stupid. He said, any movement, any action which increases the prosperity of any class, lowest class, middle class, whatever, anything that helps out the people of your country is a good action.
Yeah.
And if you don't do that action, you will cause them to hate their own country, and they will take the only other method available to them, which is to join the unions.
Yeah.
And so that's why people join unions, because what else can they do if the government won't listen? And so the way Hitler thought to combat unions was to be a good government. You take care of the lower classes, you take care of the working class, you make people wealthy and happy. He said anything that makes people wealthy and happy is nationalistic, because then your country is strong.
Yeah.
He was a very smart guy.
Yes.
And
he is also awful.
Well, yeah, that's why I say I think that Communist Manifesto should be mandatory reading. I do not think that Mein Kampf should be.
Yeah.
Because he's good. He's a very, very convincing fellow.
Yeah.
But, very insightful, and it's kind of weird because I just wanted to end with that insight, regardless of the person, but it was Hitler, so it kind of makes it awkward. Anyway, bye.
Yeah.
I wish that, like...
Look, you haven't started shaving your head yet, and you're not wearing high-heeled black boots, so...
Yeah, no, I just... Like, why couldn't he have been like Machiavelli and never done anything and just had a really clever book? Then we could actually discuss his ideas a bit easier.
Being slightly racist in the book?
Well, so far he hasn't really... Well, he has been against the Slavs, but it was in... As a Slavic descendant, it was in a way that was kind of funny. He was like, they can't govern themselves. And then you look at like the Balkans today and you're like, well, I mean...
Yeah.
I assume there was quotes at the start of the book about the Jews that were really nasty, but I haven't read those yet. So we'll see how it goes.
Yeah.
But,
also, I don't know if Sorbs are Slavic. They kind of ran away from Slovenia because of all the problems in the Balkans.
Yeah, well, they're Slavic descended.
Yeah.
But, I mean, that's so far back. Do we even get a Sorb pass? Well, it's not that far. It's our great-grandfather.
Grandfather, more.
No, because our grandfather's father changed the family name.
I guess.
Yeah.
But he changed it to be Western.
Yeah.
But he was still...
Yeah, so our great-grandfather was Sorbian-ish.
Yeah.
Although I don't even know if he lived in the city, so... Alright, end. Bye.
Bye.